Hello everyone, I am MANO Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Michael Williams, and I am 32 years old. This happened in Baxter State Park, Maine, just last autumn. The crunch of fallen leaves beneath my boots was supposed to be comforting. The sweet smell of pine sap and decaying foliage should have brought me peace. Instead, with each step deeper into the wilderness of Baxter State Park, something inside me grew increasingly uneasy. "We're making good time," Sarah said, consulting her GPS. My wife of 3 years was always the optimist, the planner, the one who insisted we needed this getaway. After losing her father last spring, she'd fallen into a depression I couldn't pull her from. This trip was her idea, a chance to reconnect with nature and with each other. "Yeah," I mumbled, adjusting my pack, though I thought we'd have hit that watershed marker by now. Sarah pushed a strand of chestnut hair from her face. Her normally bright blue eyes seemed dull in the fading afternoon light. "The app says another mile or so. We'll make camp before dark." I should have trusted my instincts then, the way the birds had gone silent, how the shadows seemed to stretch longer than they should have. But Sarah needed this trip, and I needed my Sarah back. We had planned a 4-day hike through some of the more remote areas of the park, ending at Mount Katahdin. Sarah had researched extensively, plotting a route that would take us through old-growth forest and past several pristine lakes. Places where, as she put it, we could finally hear ourselves think. The trouble started that first night. We found a clearing near Kidney Pond, set up our tent, and got a small fire going just as darkness fell. The flames cast dancing shadows across Sarah's face as she finally smiled. Really smiled, for the first time in months. "See," she said, passing me a metal cup of whiskey-laced hot chocolate. "Isn't this better than staring at Netflix all weekend?" I had to admit it was peaceful. The star-filled sky above us was breathtaking, unmarred by city light pollution. The Milky Way streaked across the heavens like spilled paint. "To new beginnings," Sarah toasted, and we clinked cups. It was around midnight when I first heard it, a soft, melodic humming that seemed to come from just beyond our campsite. I sat up in our tent, straining to hear. "Sarah," I whispered, nudging her. "Do you hear that?" She rolled over, half asleep. "Hear what?" "Sounds like someone singing." Sarah listened for a moment, then shook her head. "Just the wind in the trees, Mike. Go back to sleep." But it wasn't the wind. It was distinctly human. A woman's voice, gentle yet somehow discordant, like a lullaby being sung slightly off-key. And beneath the melody was something else. Words I couldn't quite make out, in a language I didn't recognize. I unzipped the tent and peered out. Our campfire had died down to embers, casting a faint red glow across our little clearing. Beyond that was nothing but darkness and the silhouettes of pine trees swaying slightly in the breeze. The singing stopped. "Hello," I called, not too loudly. We hadn't seen anyone else on the trail all day, but other campers weren't impossible. No response came, just the soft hooting of an owl somewhere in the distance. I zipped up the tent and lay back down, but sleep evaded me. Every time I started to drift off, I'd hear it again, just on the edge of perception. By morning, I was exhausted and irritable. "You look like hell," Sarah remarked as she handed me a cup of instant coffee. "Didn't sleep well," I admitted. "Thought I kept hearing someone singing." Sarah frowned. "I didn't hear anything." She placed her hand on my forehead. "No fever. Maybe it's the altitude." "We're not that high up yet," I said. "Probably just my imagination." We packed up camp and continued our hike. It was a gorgeous autumn day. Crisp air, vibrant foliage, golden sunlight filtering through the canopy. My mood improved as we walked, and I began to think I'd simply been overtired the night before. Around noon, we stopped at a rocky outcropping overlooking Nessawadnahunk Stream. The water rushed below us, crystal clear and cold. We ate sandwiches and planned the rest of our day's hike. "There's supposed to be an old trapper's cabin near Russell Pond," Sarah said, scrolling through her phone. "Might be interesting to check out." I noticed her signal was weak, just one bar. "Better download any maps you need now. We'll probably lose service completely soon." She nodded, but seemed distracted, staring at something across the stream. "What is it?" I asked. "I thought I saw someone," she said slowly. "A woman watching us from those trees." I followed her gaze but saw nothing except dense forest. "A hiker?" Sarah shook her head. She was just standing there, in a white dress. I scanned the area again. "I don't see anyone now." "Forget it," Sarah said, shoving her phone in her pocket. "Let's keep moving." We hiked another 4 miles that afternoon, the terrain growing steeper and more challenging. The forest changed too. The trees older, gnarled, their branches reaching out like arthritic fingers. Moss hung in long tendrils and the ground became spongy with decay. "Are you sure we're still on the trail?" I asked as Sarah consulted her GPS for the 3rd time in an hour. "The signal keeps jumping," she admitted, "but we should be heading in the right direction." The light was failing fast, earlier than it should have. Heavy clouds had rolled in, threatening rain. We needed to find a place to camp, and soon. "There," Sarah pointed to a small clearing about 50 yards ahead. "That should work." The clearing was oddly perfect, a near-perfect circle of flat ground surrounded by ancient pines. At its center was a crude fire pit made of stones, blackened from previous use. "Someone's camped here before," I said, dropping my pack with relief. Sarah nodded, already unrolling our tent. "Makes sense. It's a good spot." As I gathered firewood, I noticed small objects hanging from the surrounding trees. Tiny bundles of twigs tied with what looked like human hair, dangling about 7 feet off the ground. "Sarah," I called, "come look at these." She examined one of the bundles, her expression unreadable. "Probably just trail markers." "They look like those witch things from that horror movie," I said. "The Blair Witch Project." Sarah rolled her eyes. Someone's idea of a joke, then, trying to scare other hikers. "Well, it's working," I muttered. We finished setting up camp just as the first raindrops began to fall. The shower was brief but soaking, and it took me forever to get our fire started with the damp wood. Night fell completely, and with it came a fog that crept along the ground, curling around our ankles like phantom cats. We ate a simple dinner of dehydrated stroganoff, neither of us talking much. Sarah seemed distracted again, frequently glancing over her shoulder at the dark wall of trees behind her. "You okay?" I asked finally. She nodded too quickly. "Just tired. And I keep thinking I see something moving out there." "An animal?" "No," she hesitated. "A person. The same woman I saw earlier, I think." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "Stay here," I said, grabbing our flashlight. "Mike, don't—" But I was already walking toward the edge of the clearing, sweeping the powerful beam across the trees. The fog swirled in the light, creating eerie, shifting patterns. The forest beyond was impossibly dark, seeming to swallow the beam after just a few yards. "Hello?" I called. "Is someone there?" The only response was the patter of water droplets falling from leaves. I was about to turn back when I caught a flash of white in my peripheral vision. Gone almost before I registered it. I swung the flashlight toward it, heart hammering. Nothing, just trees and fog and darkness. "This is stupid," I muttered and headed back to the fire. Sarah was huddled close to the flames, her face pale. "Did you see anything?" I shook my head. "Just tricks of the light." We went to bed early, exhausted from the day's hike. I held Sarah close in our tent, listening to the night sounds. The occasional hoot of an owl, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. Normal forest sounds. Until they weren't. I woke suddenly, completely alert. The inside of the tent was pitch black, no moonlight filtering through the fabric. Sarah was still asleep beside me, her breathing deep and regular. What had woken me? Then I heard it again. The singing. The same haunting melody from the night before, but closer now. Much closer. It seemed to be coming from just outside our tent. I reached for the flashlight, my hand trembling. Should I wake Sarah? Look outside? The singing continued, rising and falling in that strange, off-key way that made my skin crawl. And then, a new sound, the soft crunch of footsteps circling our tent. Slow, deliberate steps that paused occasionally before continuing their circuit. Fear paralyzed me. I lay perfectly still, clutching the unlit flashlight, willing whoever, whatever, was out there to go away. The footsteps completed their circle and stopped directly in front of our tent flap. The singing ceased. For several heartbeats, there was absolute silence. Then a whisper, so close it could have been inside the tent with us. "Sarah," it called in a voice like dry leaves rustling. "Sarah Gray." My blood froze. Gray was Sarah's maiden name, a name she hadn't used in 3 years since our wedding. A name that wasn't on any of our hiking permits or reservations. Sarah stirred beside me. What?" she murmured, still half asleep. "Shh," I breathed, barely audible. Outside, the whispering continued. "Come to me, Sarah Gray. Your father is waiting." Sarah sat bolt upright, now fully awake. "Dad," she gasped. "Sarah, no." I started, but she was already fumbling for the tent zipper. I grabbed her arm. "Don't open it." "I heard my father," she insisted, her voice rising with hysteria. "He's out there." "Your father is dead," I said firmly, immediately regretting my harshness. Sarah flinched as if I'd slapped her. "I know what I heard." Outside, the whispering had stopped. I strained to hear any sound of movement, but there was nothing. I switched on the flashlight, its beam harsh in the confined space of the tent. Sarah's face was tear-streaked, her eyes wild with a mixture of grief and hope that broke my heart. "I'm going to look outside," I said. "You stay here." "No," she clutched at me. "Don't leave me alone." "Okay," I agreed. "We'll look together, but stay behind me." I unzipped the tent slowly, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet night. I poked my head out first, sweeping the flashlight around our campsite. The fire had died completely. The clearing looked exactly as we'd left it. Our cooking gear stacked neatly by the fire pit, our backpacks hanging from a tree branch to keep them away from animals. There was no sign that anyone had been there. I stepped out of the tent, helping Sarah out behind me. The night was unnaturally still. No breeze, no animal sounds, not even the drip of rainwater from the trees. "Hello?" Sarah called, her voice small and frightened. "Dad?" I put my arm around her shoulders. "There's no one here, Sarah. You were dreaming." She shook her head stubbornly. "I wasn't asleep. I heard him call my name." I was about to argue when something caught my eye, a flash of white at the edge of the clearing just beyond the reach of our flashlight beam. "There," Sarah pointed. "Did you see it?" I nodded, my mouth suddenly dry. "Stay here," I said, and before she could protest, I started toward where we'd seen the movement. The fog had thickened, wrapping around my legs as I moved. The temperature seemed to drop with each step I took away from our tent. The flashlight beam appeared weaker too, barely penetrating the gloom. I reached the edge of the clearing and stopped, shining the light into the trees. For a moment, I saw nothing. Then, about 20 yards in, I caught it again. A figure in white, standing motionless between two massive pines. It was a woman, just as Sarah had described. Her dress was old-fashioned, long and flowing, muddied at the hem. Her hair hung in lank strands around a face I couldn't quite make out in the darkness. "Who are you?" I called, my voice steadier than I felt. "This is a private campsite." The figure didn't respond or move. I took a step closer, and the flashlight flickered once, twice, then died. Darkness engulfed me. I fumbled with the flashlight, hitting it against my palm, but it remained stubbornly dead. Without its beam, I could no longer see the woman, or anything else more than a few feet away. "Mike," Sarah called from behind me, her voice tight with fear. "Stay by the tent," I shouted back. The flashlight died. I turned to head back, then froze as a cold breath ghosted across the back of my neck. "She belongs with us now," whispered a voice directly behind me, the same rustling whisper from outside our tent. I whirled around, heart thundering in my chest, but could see nothing in the inky darkness. "Mike!" Sarah screamed. "Where are you?" Her voice snapped me out of my paralysis. I staggered back toward the clearing, moving as fast as I dared in the darkness, tripping over roots and undergrowth. I broke through the tree line and saw Sarah standing by our collapsed tent, holding her cell phone up as a makeshift light. Its feeble glow barely illuminated her terrified face. "Someone's out there," I gasped, grabbing her arm. "We need to pack up. Now." "What, in the dark?" she protested. "We'll use your phone light. Just grab the essentials. Water, some food, the map. Leave the tent. We need to get out of here." "And go where?" Sarah asked. "It's the middle of the night." "Back to the main trail," I said, already stuffing items into my day pack. "We passed a ranger station about 6 miles back. We can make it by morning." Sarah looked like she wanted to argue further, but something in my expression must have convinced her. She nodded and began helping me pack. Within 10 minutes, we had our small backpacks ready. Sarah's phone was down to 15% battery, so we used it sparingly, just enough to find our way out of the clearing and back to what we hoped was the main trail. The forest at night was a different world, threatening, disorienting, alive with shadows. Every tree looked the same. Every path seemed to circle back on itself. The fog had grown so thick it was like wading through a cloud, and it muffled all sound except our labored breathing and pounding hearts. We walked for what felt like hours, Sarah's phone battery dwindling to 5%, then 3%, then nothing. We were plunged into true darkness, with only the faintest moonlight filtering occasionally through the clouds and canopy. "Mike, I'm scared," Sarah whispered, clutching my hand so tightly her nails dug into my skin. "I don't think we're on a trail anymore." She was right. The ground beneath our feet was uneven, strewn with rocks and fallen branches. We were bushwhacking through virgin forest, hopelessly lost. "We'll stop and wait for daylight," I decided. "It's too dangerous to keep going blind." We found a relatively flat spot beneath a large pine tree and sat with our backs against its trunk, huddled together for warmth. The temperature had dropped significantly, and our breath fogged in the air. "What did you see out there?" Sarah asked after a long silence. "In the trees?" I hesitated, not wanting to frighten her more. "I'm not sure," I said finally. "It looked like a woman in a white dress, but it was too dark to see clearly." Sarah shivered against me. "When I was little, my grandmother used to tell me stories about the Penobscot tribes that lived in these forests. She said they believed in a spirit called the White Lady of the Woods." "What kind of spirit?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "A malevolent one," Sarah said softly. "She was once a real woman, a bride who was abandoned on her wedding day. She wandered into the forest in her white dress, got lost, and died of exposure. Now her spirit lures hikers off the trails, especially those who are grieving or vulnerable." "Your grandmother told you this as a child?" I asked incredulously. Sarah laughed without humor. She wasn't big on age-appropriate stories, but she swore it was true. She said her own brother went missing in these woods back in the 1950s. They found his body a week later, a smile frozen on his face, all his hair turned white. I pulled Sarah closer. "It's just a story, a local legend. Every forest has them." "Then who was calling my name?" she challenged. "Who knew my maiden name? Who said my father was waiting for me?" I had no answer for that. We must have dozed off eventually, despite our fear. I woke to gray dawn light and the soft patter of rain on the pine needles above us. Sarah was still asleep against my shoulder, her face peaceful for the first time in days. I gently shook her awake. "Morning," I said, trying to sound more cheerful than I felt. "The rain should clear soon, and we can figure out where we are." Sarah blinked up at me, momentarily confused. Then the memory of the previous night flooded back. "Did you see anything else? While I was asleep?" I shook my head. "All quiet." We ate a meager breakfast of trail mix and jerky, then tried to get our bearings. Without GPS or a compass, we had to rely on basic wilderness knowledge: moss growing on the north side of trees, the position of the rising sun through the clouds. "I think the main trail is that way," I said, pointing east. "If we keep the sun on our right shoulder all morning, we should hit it eventually." Sarah nodded, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. Neither was I, if I'm being honest. But we had to try something. We walked for hours, the forest growing denser, the terrain more difficult. Several times we had to backtrack around impassable ravines or thickets. The rain continued, a steady drizzle that soaked through our clothes and dampened our spirits. By midday, we still hadn't found the trail. We stopped to rest on a fallen log, sharing the last of our water. "We should have hit it by now," Sarah said, voicing what we both were thinking. I nodded grimly. "Maybe we're farther off course than I thought." Sarah stood suddenly, her head cocked to one side. "Do you hear that?" I listened. At first, I heard nothing but the rain. Then, faintly in the distance, a sound that made my heart leap: human voices. "Someone's out there," I exclaimed, jumping to my feet. "Hey, hello, we're here." We both shouted until our voices were hoarse, but there was no response. The voices neither grew louder nor faded away. They remained just at the edge of hearing, tantalizingly close. "Come on," Sarah said, grabbing her pack. "We have to find them." We moved as quickly as we could toward the sound, scrambling over fallen trees and through dense underbrush. The voices seemed to shift direction occasionally, forcing us to change course. It was maddening. Always just ahead, always just out of reach. After nearly an hour of this frustrating pursuit, we stumbled into another clearing. This one was smaller than where we'd camped, and at its center stood a small, dilapidated cabin. The voices had stopped. "What the hell?" I muttered, approaching the structure cautiously. It was an old trapper's cabin, its log walls rotting, its single window broken. The door hung askew on rusted hinges. It looked like it hadn't been used in decades. "This must be the cabin near Russell Pond," Sarah said, "the one I mentioned yesterday. But that would mean—" Her voice trailed off as she realized the implication. "We've been walking in circles," I finished for her. Sarah's face crumpled. "We're never going to get out of here, are we?" "Don't say that," I said firmly. "Look, the cabin means we're near Russell Pond, and Russell Pond is on the map. We can reorient ourselves." I didn't mention that without a map or GPS, this information wasn't particularly helpful. Sarah wiped her eyes. "Should we check inside? There might be supplies." I hesitated, eyeing the decrepit structure. It didn't look safe, but we were desperate. "I'll go. You wait here." "No," Sarah said immediately. "We stick together, remember?" I couldn't argue with that. Together, we approached the cabin's tilted door. I pushed it open slowly, wincing at the loud creak of the hinges. The interior was a single room, dark and musty. Rain dripped through holes in the roof, forming puddles on the warped wooden floor. There was a small stone fireplace against one wall, a crude table, and what might have once been a bed frame, now collapsed and rotting. "Not exactly the Hilton," I joked weakly, stepping inside. Sarah followed, her eyes darting nervously around the space. "Look," she pointed to the table. "Something's there." I approached cautiously. On the rough wooden surface lay a single white flower, a trillium, pristine and perfect, as if it had just been placed there. Beside it was a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. "That's weird," I said, picking up the paper. "Trilliums don't bloom in autumn." I unfolded the paper carefully, afraid it might disintegrate in my hands. It was a hand-drawn map of the area around Russell Pond, with trails marked in faded ink. In one corner, someone had written in elegant, old-fashioned script, "Follow me home, Sarah Gray." My blood ran cold. I looked up at Sarah, who had gone deathly pale. "Let me see that," she whispered, snatching the paper from my hands. She stared at it, then at me, her eyes wide with fear. "This isn't possible." "Sarah." "This is my father's handwriting," she said, her voice shaking. "And this—" She pointed to a small symbol drawn near the edge of the map, a circle with a cross through it. "This was our secret sign. When I was little and got scared, he'd draw it for me. It meant everything would be okay." I didn't know what to say. It couldn't be her father's writing. That was impossible. But I couldn't deny the evidence of my own eyes, or the terror and confusion on Sarah's face. "Someone's playing a sick joke," I said finally. "They must have overheard us talking about your dad." "When?" Sarah demanded. "We haven't seen another soul since we started hiking. And how would they know about our private symbol? How would they know my maiden name?" Before I could respond, a sound outside made us both freeze, the snap of a twig, as if someone had stepped on it. "Hello," I called, moving toward the door. "Is someone there?" No answer came. I stepped outside, scanning the clearing. At first, I saw nothing unusual. Then, at the far edge of the clearing, I spotted her, the woman in white, standing motionless between two trees. This time, I could see her more clearly. Her dress was tattered and stained, her long, dark hair tangled with leaves and twigs. Her face was pale, gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to hold no light, and she was beckoning to us. Slowly, deliberately, one pale hand raised, finger crooked in invitation. "Sarah," I said, my mouth dry. "Don't look out." But Sarah was already beside me, gasping as she saw the figure. "That's her," she whispered. "The woman I saw before." To my horror, Sarah took a step forward toward the ghostly figure. I grabbed her arm. "What are you doing?" "She knows where my father is," Sarah said, her voice strangely flat. She shook off my hand and took another step. "Sarah, your father is dead," I said desperately. "That thing, whatever it is, it's not going to lead you to him." Sarah didn't seem to hear me. She continued walking, slowly but steadily, toward the waiting figure. I ran after her, grabbing her shoulders and spinning her to face me. "Sarah, snap out of it!" Her eyes were unfocused, her expression blank. "I have to go to him," she said mechanically. "He's waiting for me." The woman in white was closer now, though I hadn't seen her move. She stood at the edge of the clearing, her hollow eyes fixed on Sarah, her beckoning more urgent. I did the only thing I could think of. I slapped Sarah hard across the face. She blinked rapidly, her eyes clearing. "Mike? What?" She looked over my shoulder, saw the waiting figure, and screamed. "Run!" I shouted, pushing her toward the opposite side of the clearing. "Don't look back!" We ran blindly into the forest, branches whipping our faces, roots threatening to trip us with every step. I could hear something pursuing us. Not footsteps, but a rustling, sliding sound like dead leaves blown by a strong wind. And the singing had started again, that eerie, off-key melody that had haunted our campsite. It seemed to come from all around us, disorienting us further. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs threatened to give out. Finally, we collapsed against a massive oak tree, gulping air. "Do you think we lost it?" Sarah gasped between breaths. I looked back the way we had come. The forest seemed empty, silent except for our ragged breathing and the soft patter of rain. "I think so." "What was that thing?" Sarah asked, her voice small and frightened. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I think your grandmother's stories might have been based on something real." Sarah's eyes widened. "The White Lady?" I shrugged helplessly. "Something is out there, something that knows things it shouldn't know, that can make us hear voices that aren't there." Sarah clutched the old map. which she'd somehow managed to hold on to during our flight. "What about this? It's my dad's writing, Mike. I'd know it anywhere." I chose my words carefully. "I think, whatever that thing is, it can get into our heads, play on our grief, our fears. Your father's memory is strong in your mind. It's using that against you." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. "So, it's not really him? He's not here?" I pulled her into my arms. "No, honey, he's not here. And he wouldn't want you to follow some thing into the woods, no matter what it promised." Sarah sobbed against my chest. I held her tightly, relief washing over me that I'd managed to break whatever spell the entity had cast on her. After a few minutes, she pulled back, wiping her eyes. "So, what do we do now?" I looked up at the sky, barely visible through the canopy. The rain had stopped, but the clouds remained, heavy and gray. "It'll be dark in a few hours. We need to find shelter, but not that cabin. And tomorrow, we stick with our original plan, head east until we hit the main trail." Sarah nodded, then looked down at the map still clutched in her hand. She studied it for a moment, then held it out to me. "Look at this. If this really is Russell Pond, then there's a ranger station only 2 miles north of here." I examined the map skeptically. It was crude, possibly decades old, but the landmarks, the cabin, the pond, the distinctive rock formation to the west, matched what we'd seen. "I don't know," I said. "It could be a trap." "Or it could be our way out," Sarah countered. 2 miles, Mike. We could be there before dark." I weighed our options. Wandering aimlessly was getting us nowhere. And if there was even a chance of finding help, "Okay," I said finally, but at the first sign of anything weird, we turned back. Sarah nodded eagerly. She seemed more like herself than she had in days, animated with purpose. I couldn't bring myself to extinguish that spark. Using the map and the compass on my watch, we set off northward. The terrain was challenging, steep in places, with dense underbrush, but we moved as quickly as we could, aware of the fading light. About a mile in, we came across a small stream. According to the map, we needed to follow it upstream to reach the ranger station. "We're on the right track," Sarah said enthusiastically. I nodded, but couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. The forest had gone quiet again, no birds, no squirrels, not even the buzz of insects. And the fog was returning, creeping along the ground, weaving between trees. "Stay close," I told Sarah, taking her hand. We followed the stream for another half-mile. The fog thickened with each step until visibility was reduced to just a few yards. The stream seemed to be getting wider, deeper. Its gentle babble had become a roar that echoed strangely in the mist. "This doesn't feel right," I said, stopping. "The ranger station should be visible by now." Sarah consulted the map. "Maybe a little farther. The scale is hard to judge." Reluctantly, I agreed to continue. The stream had become more like a river, its water dark and swift. The fog was so dense now that Sarah, just a few feet ahead of me, appeared as little more than a silhouette. "Sarah," I called, "wait up." She paused, turning back toward me. But in that moment, something changed. The silhouette shifted, elongated. It was no longer Sarah standing there, but the woman in white, her hollow eyes boring into mine. I stumbled backward, a cry stuck in my throat. "Mike?" Sarah's voice came from my right, my actual wife. Still flesh and blood, concern etched on her face. "What's wrong?" I looked back at where I'd seen the apparition, but there was nothing there now except swirling fog. "We need to go," I said, grabbing Sarah's arm. "Now." "But we're almost—" "It's not a ranger station," I cut her off. "There never was one. This whole thing, the map, the voices, it's all been leading us exactly where it wants us to go." Sarah's face paled as understanding dawned. "The White Lady! She's playing with us," I finished grimly, "like a cat with mice." A sound rose from the fog-shrouded river, the singing again, that terrible, beautiful melody that had haunted our nights. But this time, I could understand the words. "Come to me, children," it sang in that rustling voice. "Come, rest your weary bones. Your father is waiting, Sarah Gray. Your mother misses you, Michael Williams." My heart nearly stopped. My mother had died when I was 16, a car accident that had left me an orphan. I'd never mentioned this to anyone in Maine. No one here knew. "Don't listen," I told Sarah, pulling her away from the river. "It's using our memories, our pain." But Sarah resisted, her eyes fixed on something in the fog. "Dad?" she whispered. Following her gaze, I saw a figure emerging from the mist, a tall man with Sarah's eyes and jawline, dressed in the same clothes he'd worn at his funeral. "Princess," the figure said, using Sarah's childhood nickname, "I've missed you so much." "No," I said firmly, stepping between Sarah and the apparition. "You're not her father." The figure's face twisted into something inhuman, just for an instant, before settling back into its benevolent mask. "Sarah knows me," it said, its voice a perfect imitation of her father's warm baritone. "Don't you, sweetheart?" I could feel Sarah trembling behind me. "It looks just like him," she whispered. "It's not him," I insisted. "Your dad loved you. He wouldn't want you to follow him into the dark." At that moment, more figures appeared in the fog, a whole crowd of them, men and women in various states of decay, all with the same hollow eyes as the White Lady. They formed a semicircle around us, cutting off our retreat. "So many have joined us," the thing wearing her father's face said. "They're all so happy here. No more pain, no more grief." Among the crowd, I spotted a woman with my mother's gentle smile, another with my brother's lanky frame, each spiritual facsimile perfectly crafted from my memories, down to the smallest detail. "This isn't real," I said as much to myself as to Sarah. "None of this is real." "Oh, but we are," said the White Lady, gliding forward. Her feet didn't seem to touch the ground. "We are as real as the fear in your hearts, as real as the grief that consumes you both." I backed away, pulling Sarah with me. "Stay behind me," I whispered. "It won't help," the White Lady said, her voice now a cacophony of all the whispers we'd heard in the forest. "She belongs with us now. Her father has waited so long to see her again." "You're not taking her," I said firmly, though terror had nearly paralyzed me. The White Lady's cold smile never reached her eyes. "We already have." I turned to look at Sarah, and my heart stopped. Her eyes had gone blank, her skin pale as milk. She was staring at the apparition of her father with naked longing. "Sarah." I shook her gently. "Sarah, stay with me." "I can be with him again," she murmured. "No more pain, no more emptiness." "This isn't what he'd want," I pleaded. "Think about it. Your real father would never want you to give up your life." Sarah's eyes fluttered, uncertainty crossing her face. The White Lady hissed, a sound like wind through dead branches. "Don't listen to him," the thing wearing her father's face urged. "He doesn't understand our bond. Come to me, Princess." Sarah took a step toward him, then another. I grabbed her arm, but she shook me off with surprising strength. "Let her go," the White Lady commanded. "She's made her choice." "No," I said, desperation giving me courage I didn't know I possessed. "I won't let you take her." I fumbled in my pocket for the one thing I hadn't thought of until now, the lighter Sarah's father had given her before he died, the one she'd insisted on bringing to start our campfires, despite my practical arguments for waterproof matches. "Sarah," I said loudly, holding up the silver Zippo, "your dad gave you this, remember? His lucky lighter from when he was in the Marines." Sarah paused, her gaze drawn to the gleaming metal. "He carried it through 2 tours in Afghanistan," I continued. "Never left his side. He wouldn't leave it behind now, would he? He wouldn't forget it." A flicker of recognition crossed Sarah's face. "Dad never went anywhere without it," she said softly. The apparition wearing her father's face snarled, the mask slipping to reveal something ancient and malevolent beneath. "He's not your father," I pressed. "None of these are our loved ones. They're just echoes. Things that thing," I pointed at the white lady, "pulled from our minds." Sarah looked from the lighter to the increasingly agitated apparition. "Dad?" she said uncertainly. The creature struggled to maintain its human appearance, but cracks were showing. Its eyes too hollow, its smile too wide. "Princess," it tried again, but its voice had changed, becoming a harsh rasp. Sarah stumbled back toward me, the spell broken. "That's not my father." "Run!" I shouted, grabbing her hand. We turned and sprinted into the forest, away from the river and its ghostly congregation. Behind us, the white lady's scream of rage tore through the fog like a physical force. The trees around us trembled and a cold wind rose, whipping the mist into frenzied shapes. "Don't look back," I gasped as we ran. Sarah's fingers were interlaced with mine, her grip painfully tight. We crashed through underbrush, leaped over fallen logs, splashed through shallow streams. The forest seemed to actively fight against us, branches reaching down to claw at our faces, roots rising up to trip our feet, the ground itself becoming treacherous and uneven. And always behind us, that terrible melody, pursuing us like a hunting hound. I don't know how long we ran. Time seemed to stretch and compress, minutes feeling like hours. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but terror kept me moving. Eventually, we burst through a dense thicket and found ourselves on a gravel road. A fire access road by the look of it, wide enough for emergency vehicles but too rough for casual traffic. "A road!" Sarah gasped, bending over with her hands on her knees, sucking in air. "We made it." I looked back the way we had come. The forest was still and peaceful, showing no sign of the supernatural horror we'd just fled. But I knew better than to trust appearances now. "Which way?" Sarah asked, scanning the road that stretched in both directions. I had no idea. Without a map or GPS, we were still essentially lost. But at least a road, any road, would eventually lead to civilization. "Let's try this way," I said, pointing north, the direction we'd been heading before the white lady's deception. We walked quickly, conserving our energy but still moving with purpose. After about 20 minutes, we rounded a bend and saw the most beautiful sight, a ranger's truck parked on the shoulder. "Hello?" I called, jogging toward it. "Is anyone there?" A figure emerged from the trees beside the road, a man in a Forest Service uniform, looking surprised to see us. "What are you folks doing out here?" he asked. "This area's been closed to hikers for a week due to flooding risks." Relief made my knees weak. "We got lost," I explained. "We've been wandering for days." The ranger, his name badge read Matthews, looked concerned. "You're a good 10 miles from any authorized trail. How'd you end up here?" Sarah and I exchanged a glance. How could we explain what we'd experienced? He'd think we were insane or on drugs. "Bad GPS," I said finally, and then our phones died. Ranger Matthews nodded sympathetically. "Happens more than you'd think. Technology fails, and if you don't have traditional navigation skills..." He shrugged. "You folks look like you've been through hell. Let me give you a ride back to the station. You can get cleaned up, call for help if you need to." We climbed gratefully into his truck. As he drove, Sarah leaned against me, exhaustion finally catching up with her. "I've been out looking for strays all morning," Matthews said conversationally. "Had reports of some hikers hearing strange noises last night, getting spooked and leaving their campsite." I tensed. "What kind of noises?" Matthews glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "Woman singing," they said. "Thought it might be some local kids playing pranks." He hesitated, then added, "Though it wouldn't be the first time we've had reports like that in this section of the park." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, suddenly alert. Matthews looked uncomfortable. "Just local superstition. This area has a history of disappearances, going back decades." "The White Lady of the Woods," Sarah said softly. Matthew's hands tightened on the steering wheel. You've heard the stories." "My grandmother used to tell me about her," Sarah said. "I always thought they were just scary bedtime stories." The ranger was silent for a long moment. "There's usually some truth at the core of those old legends," he said finally. "These forests are ancient. They have memories." We rode in silence for a while, each lost in our own thoughts. I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd escaped something truly terrible, and by the narrowest of margins. As we approached the ranger station, Matthews cleared his throat. "We don't usually include this in our official reports," he said, "but if you two really encountered something out there, I'd appreciate knowing. Helps me keep other hikers safe." I looked at Sarah. She nodded slightly. "We did see something," I admitted. "A woman in white. She knew things about us. Things she shouldn't have known. And she could make us see people who weren't there, people we'd lost." Matthews nodded grimly. "Sounds like her. She preys on grief, on emotional wounds. Makes you see what you most want to see, then leads you deeper into the woods until you're lost beyond finding." "What is she?" Sarah asked. The ranger shrugged. "The Penobscot tribes said she was once human, a woman who lost everyone she loved and made a bargain with dark forces to ease her pain. But the price was her humanity and her soul. Now she collects other lost souls to ease her loneliness." "How did we escape?" I wondered aloud. "Not many do," Matthews said simply. "She must not have gotten her hooks in deep enough. Or maybe you had something she couldn't overcome." He glanced at Sarah. "Love, maybe. The real kind. Not the echo she offers." We reached the ranger station, a sturdy log building with a radio antenna and several vehicles parked outside. Matthews helped us inside, where another ranger, a middle-aged woman named Chen, immediately set about getting us hot coffee and first aid for our various cuts and scratches. As we sat warming ourselves by the station's wood stove, Sarah took my hand. "Thank you," she said softly, "for not giving up on me out there." I squeezed her fingers. "Never." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "I think I'm ready now, to let Dad go. Not forget him. I'll never do that, but to stop letting the grief consume me." I pulled her close, my throat tight with emotion. "He'd be proud of you." "Yeah," she smiled sadly. "I think he would." Later, as we waited for the car Matthews had called to take us back to civilization, I stepped outside onto the station's porch. The forest stretched before me, beautiful and serene in the late afternoon sunlight. It was hard to reconcile its peaceful appearance with the nightmare we'd experienced. A movement caught my eye. At the edge of the tree line, a flash of white. My heart raced, but when I looked more carefully, I saw it was just a trillium flower, swaying gently in the breeze. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that something was waiting, patient as the ancient trees, for the next lost souls to wander into its domain. I turned and went back inside, closing the door firmly behind me. My name is Michael Williams, and I am 32 years old. This happened in Baxter State Park, Maine, just last autumn. I've never told this story to anyone but the rangers who found us. Who would believe it? But every word is true, and if you're planning a hike in those remote woods, my advice is simple. Stay on the marked trails, and if you hear singing in the night or see a woman in white beckoning to you from the trees, run. Run as fast and as far as you can, and don't look back, because the White Lady of the Woods is still there, waiting, and not everyone is as lucky as we were. My name is Benjamin Collins, and I am 32 years old. This happened in Baxter State Park, Maine, 3 summers ago. I've always been the outdoorsy type, preferring mountain trails to office cubicles. My girlfriend, Laura Adams, was quite the opposite, a devoted city girl who found comfort in concrete and convenience. We'd been dating for about a year when I finally convinced her to join me on a weekend camping trip. "Just once," I'd promised. "If you hate it, we'll never go again." Laura reluctantly agreed, drawn partially by my enthusiasm and partially by the photos I'd shown her of Mount Katahdin's breathtaking vistas. We planned a 3-day trip to Baxter State Park, one of Maine's most beautiful wilderness areas. I'd hiked there before, but never ventured to the park's more remote northern regions. "Are you sure this is safe?" Laura asked as we drove along the winding road leading to the park entrance. Her fingers nervously played with the zipper of her brand-new hiking jacket, a gesture that had become habitual over the past few days. "Perfectly safe," I assured her, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "Thousands of people camp here every year. There's nothing to worry about." I wish I could go back and slap myself for those words. The ranger at the entrance gate was an elderly man with a weathered face and distant eyes. He processed our permits with mechanical efficiency, barely looking up from his paperwork. "You folks heading to Nesawatnahunk Lake?" he asked, noticing our reservation details. "That's right," I replied cheerfully. "I've heard the trails there are fantastic." He paused, pen hovering over paper. "Pretty remote area. Not many folks go up that way this time of year." He finally looked up, his gaze lingering on Laura before shifting back to me. "Make sure you stick to the marked trails. Some folks have gotten turned around out there." "We will," I promised, taking our permits. As we drove away, Laura glanced back at the ranger station. "He seemed odd," she said. I shrugged. "Park rangers are usually characters. Comes with spending all that time alone in the woods." The drive to our campsite took another hour along increasingly rough roads. By the time we reached the small parking area near Nesawatnahunk Lake, the sun was already beginning its descent behind the tree line, casting long shadows across the forest floor. We shouldered our packs and hiked the short trail to our designated campsite. Laura was quiet during the walk, her eyes darting nervously at every sound. I did my best to point out interesting flora and explain the basics of wilderness safety, trying to ease her anxiety. The campsite was beautiful, a small clearing surrounded by towering pines with a view of the lake between the trees. I showed Laura how to help set up our tent while I gathered wood for a fire, pleased to see her reluctantly enjoying herself as she mastered the tent poles. "This isn't so bad," she admitted as we sat beside the fire that evening, watching the last rays of sunlight disappear from the lake's surface. "It's actually kind of peaceful." I smiled, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "See? I told you camping wasn't all mosquitoes and dirt." As darkness fell completely, the forest changed. The chirping of birds gave way to the distant hooting of owls and the rustling of nocturnal creatures. Our little fire became an island of light in an ocean of darkness so complete it seemed to swallow the beams of our flashlights. "Do you hear that?" Laura asked suddenly, her body tensing beside me. I listened. At first, I heard nothing beyond the normal sounds of the forest at night. Then, faintly, I caught it, a sound like distant crying, or perhaps singing, carried on the wind. "Probably just the wind through the trees," I said, though something about the sound made the hair on my arms stand on end. "Or maybe campers on the other side of the lake. It sounds like a woman," Laura whispered. "Crying." I forced a laugh. "Your city ears are playing tricks on you. Out here, everything sounds different." The sound faded, and Laura relaxed slightly, though she insisted on sitting closer to me. We roasted marshmallows and talked about trivial things. Work, friends, the movie we'd seen the previous weekend. Normal conversation to distract ourselves from the vastness of the wilderness surrounding us. Eventually, we doused the fire and retreated to our tent. Laura fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the day's activities. I lay awake longer, listening to the sounds of the forest and her gentle breathing beside me. Just as I was drifting off, I heard it again. That distant, mournful sound. Not wind, not an animal. It sounded like words, though I couldn't make them out. I must have fallen asleep eventually, because the next thing I knew, pale morning light was filtering through the tent fabric. Laura was already awake, sitting up in her sleeping bag with an odd expression on her face. "There was someone outside the tent last night," she said without preamble. I rubbed my eyes. "What? Are you sure?" She nodded, her face pale. I woke up around 3. I heard footsteps circling the tent. Slow, deliberate footsteps. "Probably just an animal," I suggested, though her intensity was making me uneasy. "Bears sometimes get curious about campsites." "It wasn't a bear, Ben." Her voice was firm. It stopped right outside where I was sleeping. I could hear breathing. Then it whispered something. I sat up, fully awake now. "What did it say?" Laura shook her head. I couldn't make it out. It was like a different language, or maybe not language at all. She hugged her knees to her chest. "I was too scared to wake you. After a while, it just went away." I unzipped the tent and looked outside. The morning was clear and beautiful, with mist rising from the lake. There were no footprints around our tent, no sign that anything had disturbed our campsite during the night. "See?" I said, trying to sound reassuring. "Just a dream. The woods can do that to you the first night." Laura didn't seem convinced, but she nodded slowly. "Maybe you're right." After breakfast, I suggested we take a hike along one of the trails leading away from the lake. "There's supposed to be a beautiful overlook about 3 miles from here," I said, showing her on my map. "We can have lunch there and head back." The hike started pleasantly enough. The trail was well maintained near the campsite, and the forest was alive with birdsong and dappled sunlight. Laura seemed to relax as we walked, her fear from the morning fading. About a mile in, I noticed the trail was becoming less distinct. Fallen trees and overgrowth suggested it hadn't been maintained recently. I checked my map, confirming we were still on the right path. "Is it supposed to be this overgrown?" Laura asked, pushing aside a branch that hung across the trail. "Probably, just not used much," I replied. "The ranger did say this area was remote." We continued onward. The forest grew denser, the trees older and more gnarled. The cheerful birdsong gradually diminished until the woods were eerily silent. I felt a growing unease, but pushed it aside. I had something to prove, that the outdoors could be enjoyable, that Laura had nothing to fear. 2 miles in, we reached a small stream crossing. The wooden footbridge marked on my map was gone, leaving only a few rotting support posts on either bank. "That's odd," I muttered, rechecking the map. "This bridge should be here." Laura peered over my shoulder at the map. "Maybe we took a wrong turn?" I shook my head. "No, we've been following the trail markers." I pointed to a faded blue blaze on a nearby tree. "See? We're on the right track." We found a narrow section of the stream where we could jump across. As Laura landed on the opposite bank, she froze, staring at something on the ground. "Ben," she called, her voice tight. "Look at this." I crossed over and followed her gaze. There, pressed into the soft mud of the bank, was a footprint. Not human, not animal, at least not any animal I recognized. It was elongated, with what looked like claws extending from the toes. The impression was deep, suggesting something heavy. "What made that?" Laura whispered. "Probably a bear," I said automatically, though I knew bear tracks well, and this was nothing like them. The mud distorted it. Laura looked unconvinced. "Can we go back? I don't feel good about this trail." I should have listened to her. Instead, I pointed to the map. "We're more than halfway to the overlook. It would be a shame to turn back now." Reluctantly, she agreed to continue. The trail grew steeper, winding its way up through increasingly dense forest. The trees here were ancient, their massive trunks covered in thick moss. Hardly any sunlight penetrated the canopy, leaving us walking in a perpetual green twilight. The silence was oppressive. No birds, no insects, not even the sound of wind through leaves. Just our breathing and the crunch of our boots on the trail. "I don't like this," Laura said after a while. "Something feels wrong." I was about to respond when I noticed something ahead, a small clearing where the trees gave way to a circle of bare earth. In the center of the clearing stood a structure, crude but unmistakably man-made. a triangle of sticks bound together with what looked like sinew or twine, with smaller sticks dangling from it like a primitive wind chime. Around the base of the structure lay small animal bones arranged in a precise pattern. "What is that?" Laura's voice was barely audible. "Probably just something made by kids," I said, though I knew no children would venture this far into the wilderness. "Or maybe a trail marker of some kind." I moved closer to examine it. The sinew binding the sticks wasn't animal tissue as I'd first thought. It was hair, human hair tied in intricate knots. Laura tugged at my sleeve. "We need to go. Now." For once, I didn't argue. We turned back the way we'd come, walking quickly. The trail seemed different somehow, the landmarks I'd noted on our way in slightly altered or missing entirely. "Are you sure this is the right way?" Laura asked after we'd been walking for 20 minutes. I checked my GPS. The screen showed only static. "Battery must be dying," I muttered, pulling out my phone. No signal, as expected, but the compass app should still work. The compass spun wildly, the needle rotating in complete circles without settling. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. "Let's just keep heading downhill," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We'll hit the stream eventually, and then we can follow it back to the bridge crossing." We walked for another hour, the forest growing darker as clouds gathered overhead. We should have reached the stream long ago. Nothing looked familiar. "We're lost," Laura finally said, her voice flat. "No, we're just taking a slightly different route back," I insisted, though I knew she was right. Somehow, we'd gotten turned around. A low rumble of thunder sounded in the distance. Perfect. "We need to find shelter before it rains," I said, looking around desperately. "Let's try to find somewhere we can wait out the storm." We pushed through the undergrowth, looking for any natural shelter, a rocky overhang, a hollow tree, anything. The forest floor began to slope upward again, contrary to my expectations. "I think I see something," Laura said suddenly, pointing ahead. "A cabin?" Through the trees, I could make out a structure, a small log cabin, weathered and gray with age. Relief flooded through me. "Come on," I said, grabbing her hand. "Maybe whoever lives there can help us get back to the campsite." As we approached, it became clear the cabin was abandoned. The door hung askew on rusted hinges, and the single window was a dark, empty socket. The surrounding clearing was overgrown with weeds and saplings, suggesting no one had lived there for years. "Hello?" I called out, just to be certain. "Anyone here?" Only silence answered. The first drops of rain began to fall as we reached the cabin's sagging porch. I peered through the doorway into the gloom beyond. "Wait here," I told Laura. "Let me check if it's safe." The cabin's interior was a single room, empty save for a rusted iron stove in one corner and what might have once been a table, now collapsed into a pile of rotting wood. The floor was dirt, the walls bare logs chinked with crumbling clay. It smelled of decay and something else, something acrid and unpleasant. "It's empty," I called back to Laura. "Not exactly the Ritz, but it'll keep us dry." She stepped cautiously inside, wrinkling her nose at the smell. "What is that? It smells like burned hair." Now that she mentioned it, the acrid scent did remind me of hair catching fire. I moved to the stove, opening its rusted door. Inside was a pile of ashes and what looked like small bones. "Let's not think about it," I said, closing the stove door. "Previous occupants probably burned whatever they could find." The rain was coming down heavily now, drumming on the cabin's roof. Despite the discomfort of our shelter, I was grateful not to be caught in the downpour. Laura stood by the window, arms wrapped around herself. "How long do you think the storm will last?" "Hard to say. Could be a quick summer shower, or it could—" My words were cut off by a blinding flash of lightning, followed immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. The cabin shook with the force of it. "That was close," I said, moving away from the metal stove. Laura turned from the window, her face suddenly pale. "Ben," she whispered, "there's someone outside." I joined her at the window. Through the rain-streaked opening, I could make out a figure standing at the edge of the clearing. The downpour made it difficult to see clearly, but it appeared to be a woman in a dark dress, her hair hanging in wet tangles around her face. "Hello?" I called out. "Do you need shelter?" The figure didn't move or respond. Another lightning flash illuminated the scene, and for a split second, I saw her clearly. Gaunt face, hollow eyes, mouth stretched in what might have been a smile or a grimace. Then darkness again. "She needs help," I said, moving toward the door. Laura grabbed my arm. "Don't go out there." "Why not? She's just standing in the rain." "That's exactly why," Laura hissed. "Who does that? Who stands perfectly still in a thunderstorm?" I hesitated, looking back out the window. The figure was gone. "Where did she go?" I murmured, scanning the clearing. A soft thump sounded on the roof above us. Then another. Footsteps moving slowly across the cabin's roof. Laura's fingers dug into my arm. "Ben," she whispered. "What is that?" "Just branches falling from the trees," I said. But even I didn't believe it. The steps were too regular, too deliberate. They stopped directly above us. For a long moment, there was silence except for the rain. Then a voice, a woman's voice, singing softly. The same mournful sound we'd heard at our campsite the night before. The words were still unintelligible, but the melody raised goosebumps on my arms. "We need to get out of here," Laura said, her voice shaking. "And go where? It's pouring rain, we're lost, and it'll be dark soon." I tried to sound rational, though my heart was racing. "It's probably just someone playing a prank." "In the middle of nowhere? During a storm?" Her voice rose hysterically. "Nobody even knows we're here." The singing stopped. A moment later, there was a scratching at the door, light at first, then more insistent, like fingernails dragging down the wood. "Hello," I called out, my voice cracking. "Who's there?" The scratching stopped. Then, slowly, the door began to swing open. "Don't," Laura whispered, backing away. "Don't look." I couldn't help it. I had to see. The doorway was empty, just rain and darkness beyond. Then she stepped into view, the woman from the clearing. Up close, I could see her dress wasn't just dark. It was filthy, tattered, and seemed to be covered in dark stains that might have been mud or might have been something else. Her hair hung in wet ropes around a face that was simultaneously young and ancient, with skin stretched too tight over sharp cheekbones. But it was her eyes that froze me in place, completely black, without whites or pupils, like empty sockets filled with ink. She smiled, revealing teeth filed to points. "You're in my home," she said, her voice a dry whisper that somehow carried over the sound of the rain. I found my voice. "We're sorry. We didn't know anyone lived here. We got lost and needed shelter from the storm." Her smile widened. "Everyone who comes here is lost. That's how I find them." "We'll leave," I said quickly. "Right now." "Oh, but the storm," she said, tilting her head at an unnatural angle. "It's not safe out there." She took a step forward. "Stay, I insist." Laura was pressed against the far wall of the cabin, her eyes wide with terror. I moved to stand between her and the woman. "We appreciate the offer, but we really need to get back to our campsite," I said firmly. "If you could just point us in the direction of Nessawadnihunk Lake, we'll be on our way." The woman's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes shifted, a flicker of something ancient and hungry. "Nessawadnihunk," she repeated, the word seeming to slither from her mouth. "Yes, I know it well. The water there is deep and cold." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It holds many secrets, many bodies." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "The ones who don't stay with me," she said simply. "They try to leave, but the forest doesn't like that." A chill ran down my spine. "What's your name?" I asked, trying to maintain some semblance of normal conversation. She smiled again. "The settlers called me Agnes. Before them, the Penobscot had another name for me." She ran a tongue over her pointed teeth. It meant, "She who waits in the trees." Lightning flashed again, illuminating the cabin in stark white light. In that instant, I saw what I hadn't noticed before. The walls weren't bare as I'd initially thought. They were covered in scratches, hundreds of them. Names, dates, desperate messages. "Help us trapped. Agnes is not human. God forgive me." The longest message caught my eye. "She changes when she feeds. Run while she's still human." The light faded, plunging us back into gloom. Agnes hadn't moved, but her smile had grown wider than any human mouth should be able to stretch. "You've seen my guest book," she said pleasantly. "So many visitors over the years. None stay long. Though, except for parts of them," she gestured toward the stove, "I keep souvenirs." Laura made a small, terrified sound. Agnes's head snapped toward her, movements jerky like a puppet on strings. "She's afraid," Agnes said, nostrils flaring as if scenting the air. "Fear makes the meat tender." I'd had enough. I reached for my hiking knife, a small blade, but better than nothing. "We're leaving now," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Don't try to stop us." Agnes laughed, a sound like dry leaves rustling. "Oh, brave one. Do you think you're the first to threaten me? To wave metal in my face?" She raised her hands, showing long, blackened nails that curved like claws. "I was old when the first iron tools were brought to these forests. I've tasted the blood of the original people, of the settlers, of lost hikers and curious children." She took another step forward. "And tonight, I'll taste yours." I grabbed Laura's hand. "Run!" I shouted, pushing past Agnes toward the door. I expected resistance, but she stepped aside easily, still smiling. That should have been my first warning. We burst out of the cabin into the rain, which had lessened to a drizzle. The forest was dark now, the storm clouds blocking what little daylight remained. "Which way?" Laura gasped, clutching my hand. I pointed downhill. "That way. Keep running." We plunged into the forest, branches whipping at our faces. I could hear nothing behind us, no signs of pursuit, but that didn't slow our pace. Pure terror drove us forward. The ground began to slope more steeply. We were definitely heading downhill, which should eventually lead us to the stream or the lake or some landmark I could recognize. "I think we're safe," I panted after we'd been running for what felt like miles. "I don't see her." Laura stopped, bending over to catch her breath. "What was that? What was she?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Some kind of forest witch? A madwoman?" "Did you see her eyes?" Laura whispered. "No one human has eyes like that." I was about to respond when we heard it, that same mournful singing, coming from somewhere ahead of us. "How?" Laura's voice failed her. "She knows these woods," I said grimly. "She's trying to cut us off. We need to change direction." We veered to the right, moving parallel to the slope rather than directly down it. The singing followed, always ahead of us, no matter which way we turned. "It's like she's everywhere," Laura sobbed as we changed direction for the third time. Exhaustion was setting in. We'd been running for too long on too little water, and the terrain was unforgiving. When Laura stumbled on a root and fell, I knew we couldn't keep this pace. "We need to hide," I whispered, helping her up. "Find somewhere to rest and figure out a plan." The light was almost gone now. In the twilight, I spotted a dense thicket of bushes next to a fallen tree. "There," I pointed. "Let's hide and wait for her to pass." We crawled into the thicket, the branches scratching our skin. I pulled Laura close, feeling her trembling against me. "What if she finds us?" she whispered. "She won't," I promised, though I had no way of knowing that. "And if she does, I'll protect you." We lay there in silence as darkness fell completely. The singing grew louder, then softer. then louder again as Agnes moved through the forest searching for us. Occasionally, we heard her calling out. "I know you're still here." Her voice would float through the trees. "I can smell your fear." Hours passed. The rain stopped entirely and the clouds parted to reveal a waning moon. Its light was both blessing and curse, allowing us to see, but also potentially revealing our hiding place. The singing had stopped. For the past hour, we'd heard nothing to indicate Agnes was still nearby. Laura had fallen into an exhausted sleep against my shoulder. I stayed awake, knife in hand, listening to the night sounds of the forest slowly return. A good sign, I thought. Animals wouldn't make noise if a predator was nearby. Perhaps Agnes had given up. Perhaps she was just toying with us, enjoying our fear without any real intention of harming us. I don't know when I dozed off. One moment I was alert, scanning the darkness. The next, I was waking with a start. A strange scent in my nostrils, burned hair, and something metallic. Laura was gone. "Laura," I whispered, frantically feeling the space beside me. "Laura!" Something warm and wet dripped onto my forehead from above. I looked up. Laura hung suspended in the branches above our hiding place, her body contorted at impossible angles. Her eyes were open, staring blindly at the moon. Her throat was torn open, blood still dripping from the wound. I screamed. I couldn't help it. Pure, primal terror tore the sound from my throat. "There you are," came Agnes's voice from behind me. "I was wondering when you'd wake up." I scrambled out of the thicket, not caring about stealth anymore. Agnes stood a few feet away, her face and dress splattered with fresh blood. Laura's blood. "What did you do to her?" I shouted, brandishing my knife. Agnes licked her fingers delicately. She was delicious. So full of fear. She cocked her head. "But you'll be even better. Your fear has had time to ripen." I backed away, knife held in front of me. "Stay away from me." "Or what?" she asked, genuinely curious. "You'll cut me. Many have tried." She held up her arms, showing pale scars crisscrossing her skin. "See? They all failed." "What are you?" I asked, continuing to back away. "I've had many names over many centuries," she said, advancing slowly. "Wendigo, Skinwalker, Witch, Demon." She grinned, her teeth gleaming in the moonlight. "The name doesn't matter, only the hunger." I turned and ran, no longer caring about direction or strategy. Pure survival instinct took over. Behind me, I heard Agnes laugh. Then the sound of something moving through the trees, not on the ground but above, leaping from branch to branch with inhuman speed. The forest opened up suddenly, and I found myself on the shore of a lake. Nessawadnahunk Lake, I realized. Somehow, in our blind flight, we'd circled back to where we started. Our tent was still there, illuminated by moonlight. My car keys were inside. If I could just reach them, I might have a chance. I raced for the tent, hearing Agnes crash through the undergrowth behind me. Her footsteps were different now. Heavier, more animal than human. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see what she had become. I reached the tent, fumbling with the zipper. Behind me, Agnes snarled, a sound no human throat could make. I finally got the tent open and dove inside, frantically searching for my pack where I'd left the keys. The tent flap tore open. Agnes stood there, silhouetted against the night sky. But she wasn't Agnes anymore, at least not the woman we'd met at the cabin. Her limbs had elongated, joints bending at unnatural angles. Her face had stretched into something resembling a wolf's muzzle, but with too many teeth crammed into the elongated jaw. The only features I recognized were her eyes, still those bottomless black pools. "No more running," she growled, her voice distorted and guttural. My fingers closed around my car keys. I also felt something else. The canister of bear spray I'd packed as a precaution. Without thinking, I grabbed it, aimed, and pressed the button as Agnes lunged. The spray hit her directly in the face. She reared back with a howl of pain, clawed hands covering her eyes. I didn't wait to see more. I burst from the tent and ran for the car, adrenaline giving me speed I didn't know I possessed. Behind me, Agnes's howls turned to shrieks of rage. I reached the car, fumbled the key into the lock, and threw myself inside. As I started the engine, Agnes appeared at the edge of the parking area, her monstrous form loping toward me on all fours. I slammed the car into reverse, tires spraying gravel. Agnes reached the spot where I had been moments before, rearing up on her hind legs, her elongated arms reaching for me. In the headlights, I caught a final glimpse of her face, the muzzle drawn back in a snarl, black eyes reflecting the light like pools of oil. Then I was on the main road, accelerating away from Baxter State Park as fast as the winding road would allow. I drove straight to the nearest police station, babbling incoherently about Laura, about Agnes, about what I'd seen. They sent searchers to our campsite, then to the coordinates I provided for the cabin. They found our tent, shredded. They found evidence of a struggle. They found blood, Laura's blood, confirmed by DNA testing. But they never found her body, and they never found any cabin matching my description. These woods are full of old hunters' shacks and abandoned buildings, the search coordinator told me, but nothing in the area you described. You were miles from any structure on our maps. They suspected me, of course, the boyfriend who returns without his girlfriend, with a wild story about a forest witch. I spent weeks being questioned, my apartment searched, my life turned inside out. What saved me, ironically, was the ranger at the park entrance. He confirmed we had entered together, confirmed I had exited alone, frantic and terrified in the middle of the night. When pressed, he admitted there had been incidents in that area of the park before. Other disappearances, other searches that found nothing. The case remains open, but the intense scrutiny has faded. I've moved away from Maine, away from forests altogether. I live in a concrete jungle now, where the only trees are in carefully maintained parks. But sometimes at night, I hear it, that mournful singing, drifting on the wind. And I know Agnes is still out there, waiting in the trees, hungry for the next lost hikers who stumble into her forest. And sometimes when I'm between sleep and waking, I hear Laura's voice whispering a warning I couldn't understand before. Some things in the wild aren't meant to be found. I should have listened. My name is Rebecca Hill, and I am 32 years old. This happened in Maine last summer when what was supposed to be a healing retreat turned into something I still can't fully comprehend. The divorce had been finalized just 3 weeks earlier. After 5 years of marriage to a man who gradually revealed himself to be controlling and manipulative, I was finally free. But freedom, I discovered, comes with its own kind of emptiness. Our apartment in Boston, now just my apartment, felt cavernous, haunted by the ghost of a relationship that had slowly poisoned itself. "You need to get away," my therapist had suggested during our weekly session. "Somewhere peaceful, where you can reconnect with yourself." That's how I found myself driving along the winding roads of western Maine, headed for a remote cabin near the Whispering Pines Forest, just outside the tiny town of Eustis. The rental listing had promised seclusion, beautiful hiking trails, and a chance to find yourself in nature's embrace. I'd been drawn to the poetic description, hoping that maybe nature could indeed embrace me when human arms had become so complicated. My golden retriever, Rusty, sat in the passenger seat, his head hanging out the window, tongue lolling in the June breeze. At least I wasn't completely alone. Rusty had been my emotional support through the divorce, the one constant in a life that had become increasingly unpredictable. As I turned onto the unmarked dirt road that supposedly led to the cabin, my GPS started to glitch. The blue line that had been guiding me suddenly disappeared, replaced by a gray void. I tapped at the screen in frustration. "Great," I muttered. "Just great." Rusty whined in response as if offering sympathy. I pulled over and checked the paper directions I'd printed as a backup. According to them, I needed to follow this road for another 7 miles, then look for a wooden sign marking the turnoff to the cabin. I put the car back in drive and continued forward, the uneven road jostling us as we ventured deeper into the woods. The trees seemed to grow denser the further we drove, branches reaching toward one another across the narrow road, creating a natural tunnel that dimmed the afternoon light. I found myself hunching forward in my seat, peering through the windshield at the increasingly shadowy path ahead. When I finally spotted the wooden sign, weathered and barely legible, I felt a surge of relief. I turned onto an even narrower path that wound through the pines for another quarter-mile before opening onto a small clearing. There, nestled against the backdrop of dense forest, stood the cabin. It was more rustic than it had appeared in the listing photos, the logs dark with age, the small porch sagging slightly on one side. But there was something charming about it too, something authentically wild that the carefully filtered online images hadn't captured. I parked and let Rusty out. He immediately bounded into the clearing, nose to the ground, investigating his new territory with canine enthusiasm. I stretched my cramped muscles and breathed in the pine-scented air, feeling some of the tension in my shoulders begin to dissolve. The cabin key was exactly where the owner had said it would be, hidden inside a fake rock near the porch steps. The door creaked open to reveal a simple but cozy interior. A combined living room and kitchen with a stone fireplace, a small bathroom, and a loft bedroom accessible by a wooden ladder. It was basic but clean, with large windows offering views of the surrounding forest. I unloaded the car, unpacked my groceries, and settled in. By early evening, I had a fire crackling in the fireplace, a glass of red wine in hand, and Rusty curled at my feet. For the first time in months, I felt something like peace. "We're going to be okay," I told Rusty, scratching behind his ears. "A week out here, just the two of us, and maybe I'll remember who Rebecca Hill was before she became Mrs. Rebecca Parker." I fell asleep that night to the sound of wind rustling through pine needles, a gentle, natural lullaby so different from the urban soundtrack of Boston. I woke the next morning, eager to explore. After a quick breakfast, I pulled on hiking boots and a light jacket. The Maine mornings were cool even in June, and set out with Rusty towards the trail the cabin owner had marked on a crude map left on the coffee table. "Whispering Pines Loop," the map proclaimed in handwritten script. "Moderate difficulty. 4 to 5 hours round trip. Beautiful views of Flagstaff Lake." The trail began at the edge of the clearing, a narrow dirt path disappearing into the trees. It was well marked at first with small blue blazes painted on tree trunks. Rusty trotted ahead, occasionally looking back as if to make sure I was still following. The forest was alive with morning sounds: birdsong, the scurrying of small animals in the underbrush, the constant whisper of wind through the pine branches overhead. I understood now why they called it Whispering Pines. There was a constant, gentle susurration, almost like hushed voices just at the edge of comprehension. After about an hour of gradually ascending terrain, we reached a rocky outcropping that offered a stunning view of the valley below and the glittering expanse of Flagstaff Lake in the distance. I sat on a sun-warmed boulder, drinking water and taking photos of the vista on my phone. Rusty explored the perimeter of the outcropping, sniffing industriously. It was while I was sitting there, feeling the sun on my face and thinking that my therapist had been right about this trip, that I first noticed something odd. The whispering of the pines seemed to have changed in quality. Where before it had been random and dispersed, now it seemed to have a rhythm, almost like speech. I tilted my head, listening more intently. She's here now. Watching. Waiting. I stood up abruptly, heart suddenly pounding. The whispers ceased immediately, leaving only the normal forest sounds. I looked around, half expecting to see someone else on the outcropping with me, but there was only Rusty, who had stopped his explorations and was looking at me with his head cocked to one side. Just the wind, I told myself firmly, or my imagination. But as we continued along the trail, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled over me. I found myself scanning the trees more carefully, startling at ordinary forest sounds. Rusty, too, seemed to grow more alert, his ears pricking up at sounds I couldn't detect, occasionally growling softly at apparently nothing. The trail grew less distinct as we continued. The blue blazes became harder to find, and in some places, the path itself seemed to disappear into the undergrowth. Several times I had to backtrack after realizing I'd wandered off the trail. The map, I was discovering, was not as accurate as I'd hoped. It was during one of these confused moments, standing in a small clearing and turning in a slow circle as I tried to locate the next trail marker, that I saw her for the first time. She stood at the far edge of the clearing, partially hidden by a large pine. An old woman, thin to the point of gauntness, with long gray hair hanging in tangled strands around a deeply lined face. She wore what looked like a nightgown, though it was so dirty and tattered it was hard to be sure. Her feet were bare and mud-stained. I froze, startled by her sudden appearance. Rusty, who had been sniffing nearby, went rigid, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "Hello," I called, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the hushed forest. "Are you okay? Are you lost?" The old woman didn't respond. She stood absolutely still, staring at me with such intensity that I could feel it like a physical touch. Then, slowly, her cracked lips pulled back in what might have been intended as a smile but looked more like a grimace, revealing yellowed teeth. A chill ran down my spine. Something wasn't right. Something about the way she stood, too still, as if she weren't quite solid. "Do you need help?" I tried again, taking a hesitant step forward. At my movement, she tilted her head at an unnatural angle, the smile stretching wider. Then, with a motion too quick for someone who looked so frail, she stepped backward into the shadow of the pine tree and, impossibly, seemed to melt into it, disappearing from view. I gasped, blinking rapidly. "Hello?" I called again, louder this time, moving cautiously toward the spot where she'd stood. "Ma'am?" But when I reached the pine tree, there was no sign of her. No footprints in the soft forest floor, no disturbed vegetation, nothing to indicate anyone had been there at all. Rusty whined, pressing against my legs, his entire body trembling. "It's okay, boy," I whispered, though I didn't believe it myself. "Let's just get back to the trail." I fumbled for my phone, thinking to call someone, though who, I wasn't sure. There was no service, of course. The screen showed only no signal where the bars should have been. With shaking hands, I consulted the map again, forcing myself to focus on the task of finding the trail. After several anxious minutes, I spotted a faded blue blaze on a distant tree and hurried toward it, Rusty staying unusually close to my side. The rest of the hike passed in a blur of hypervigilance. Every shadow seemed to hold a watching presence. Every rustle in the underbrush made me jump. The whispering of the pines now seemed malevolent, a constant murmuring commentary I couldn't quite make out but that filled me with dread. When we finally emerged from the forest and into the cabin's clearing, the late afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the ground. I rushed inside, locking the door behind us, then immediately felt foolish for doing so. What was I locking out? An elderly woman who might have needed help? Or something else entirely? Something that could melt into trees and whisper with the voice of the wind? That evening, I couldn't bring myself to build a fire, despite the chill that had settled over the cabin as the sun set. A fire meant light, and light meant visibility through the large windows that suddenly seemed like vulnerabilities rather than assets. Instead, I sat in the growing darkness, Rusty pressed against me on the small sofa, jumping at every creak of the cabin's old wooden frame. I tried to rationalize what I'd seen, perhaps a homeless woman living in the forest, or even just a trick of light and shadow combined with my own stress-frayed nerves. But deep down, I knew better. There had been something profoundly wrong about the woman in the forest, something that went beyond simple explanations. As full darkness descended, I became aware of a sound outside, a slow, deliberate scraping against the cabin's outer wall. Scratch, pause, scratch, pause. It moved slowly around the perimeter, as if something was circling the cabin, dragging something sharp against the logs. Rusty growled, his eyes fixed on the wall where the sound was coming from. I sat paralyzed, hardly daring to breathe as the scratching continued its methodical circuit of the cabin. When it reached the front door, it stopped. In the silence that followed, I could hear my own pulse thundering in my ears. Then, softly at first, but with growing insistence, came a knocking. 3 slow knocks, a pause, then 3 more. "Who's there?" I called, my voice barely above a whisper. The knocking stopped. Then, so quietly I might have imagined it had Rusty not reacted with another growl, came a voice, raspy, aged, with a strange lilting quality. "Let me in, child. It's cold out here. So cold and dark." It was the voice of an elderly woman, matching the figure I'd seen in the forest. But there was something wrong with it. A hollowness, as if it were coming from the bottom of a well. "Who are you?" I demanded, louder this time, trying to mask my fear with anger. "Just an old woman who lives in these woods," came the reply, a hint of amusement now coloring the raspy voice. "I saw you on the trail today. Thought I'd come say hello proper-like." "It's late," I said. "Please come back tomorrow." A soft chuckle drifted through the door, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. "Oh, I don't think so, child. I think you need to let me in now. The forest isn't safe at night. Not for you. Not for your pretty dog." At the mention of Rusty, the golden retriever's growl deepened, his hackles rising. I put a restraining hand on his collar, suddenly afraid of what might happen if the door were to open. "I'm fine, thank you," I said, forcing steadiness into my voice. "And I have a large dog, as you can hear. Please leave." Another chuckle, this one longer and more unsettling. "Large dog? Oh, child, that won't help you with what's out here." The scratching resumed then, moving away from the door and around to the side of the cabin where the bedroom window was located. I remembered with a jolt of fear that I'd left that window open a crack to let in the cool night air. I hurried to the ladder leading to the loft, climbing it as quickly as I could with Rusty whining anxiously below. I reached the window just as the scratching arrived beneath it, slamming it shut and securing the latch with trembling fingers. As I did so, I caught a glimpse of what stood outside. The same gaunt figure I'd seen in the forest, but somehow changed. In the moonlight, her skin seemed almost translucent, stretched too tightly over jutting bones. Her eyes reflected the light like an animal's, glowing faintly green. And her smile, that terrible smile, was wider now, stretching beyond the natural limits of a human face. She saw me looking and raised one skeletal hand in a mocking wave, her elongated fingers ending in what looked like curved, darkened nails, or claws. I stumbled backward, nearly falling down the ladder in my haste to get away from the window. Back in the main room, I grabbed my phone again, desperately hoping that somehow, miraculously, I might have service now. Still nothing. The scratching continued throughout the night, moving methodically around the cabin, occasionally interrupted by bouts of that hollow knocking and the raspy voice calling out in sing-song tones, offering false comfort or issuing veiled threats. Rusty and I huddled together on the sofa, neither of us sleeping, both flinching at every sound. Only as dawn broke did the harassment finally cease. I waited a full hour after sunrise before cautiously approaching a window to peer outside. The clearing was empty, peaceful in the morning light, showing no signs of the night's visitor. With Rusty at my side, I reluctantly ventured outside to check for physical evidence of what I'd experienced. What I found chilled me despite the warming day. Long, deep grooves in the cabin's wooden exterior, too high to have been made by any woodland animal, running in a continuous line around the entire structure. And at the front door, scratched deeply into the wood in crude, jagged letters, "I'll be back tonight." I'd intended to stay a week, but I was now determined to leave immediately. I began throwing my belongings haphazardly into my suitcase, urging Rusty to stay close as I packed. But when I tried to start my car, the engine merely clicked feebly before falling silent. I tried again and again with the same result. The battery, which had been perfectly fine yesterday, was now completely dead. I sat in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I was trapped. The nearest neighbor, according to the cabin owner, was 5 miles away. The village of Eustis was nearly 15 miles distant. I could try walking, but the thought of being in those woods, potentially after dark if I couldn't make the journey quickly enough, no, I would have to find another solution. After a thorough search of the cabin, I found a hand crank emergency radio in a dusty cabinet. I spent nearly an hour working the crank and scanning frequencies before I managed to reach the local ranger station. The connection was poor, full of static, but I was able to communicate enough of my situation, stranded with a dead car battery, needing assistance, to secure a promise that someone would try to reach me by the end of the day. The hours crawled by with excruciating slowness. I used the time to fortify the cabin as best I could, checking every window lock, dragging the heavy wooden table in front of the door, fashioning makeshift coverings for the smaller windows using thumbtacks and blankets from the bed. I found a large knife in the kitchen drawer and kept it close at hand. As the afternoon waned with no sign of help, my anxiety mounted. I kept thinking about the message scratched into the door, "I'll be back tonight." I had no reason to doubt the promise. The radio crackled to life just as the sun was beginning to set, making me jump. "Ms. Hill?" The voice was distorted but understandable. "This is Ranger Sullivan from the Eustis station. I'm afraid we won't be able to reach you tonight. There's been a major incident on Route 27, multiple vehicle collision. All personnel are tied up with that. We'll try to get someone to you first thing tomorrow morning." My heart sank as I acknowledged the message and signed off. Another night in the cabin, another night with her. As darkness fell, I built a fire, deciding that the light and warmth were worth the visibility it created. I filled every container I could find with water, uncertain why I felt this was necessary, but following some deep instinctual urging. Rusty refused to leave my side, his normally cheerful demeanor replaced by watchful vigilance. The scratching began earlier this time, starting just as true night settled over the forest. It was more aggressive too, harder and faster, occasionally building to a frenzy before abruptly stopping, only to begin again moments later. The voice came not just from the door now, but seemed to emanate from all around the cabin, sometimes sounding as if it were coming from directly overhead, or from the chimney, or from right behind me within the cabin itself. "Let me in, child. Let me in, and I'll make it quick. Keep me out, and I'll have to get creative." I didn't respond, clutching the kitchen knife and staring at the door as if my gaze could reinforce the lock. New sounds joined the scratching and the voice. Heavy thuds against the walls and roof, as if something large were hurling itself against the cabin. The chimney seemed to develop a blockage, causing smoke to back up into the room, stinging my eyes and making Rusty sneeze repeatedly. And then, most terrifying of all, came a new voice. Not the raspy, elderly tone, but a man's voice, familiar and dear to me. "Becca? Becca, are you in there? I've been so worried about you." I froze, my breath catching. It was David's voice, my ex-husband's voice, perfectly rendered down to the slight Boston accent. "Becca, please, open the door. My car broke down on the road and I've been walking for hours. I know things ended badly between us, but when you didn't return my calls for days, I got worried and came looking for you." For one brief, insane moment, I almost believed it was him, almost moved toward the door, but then I remembered. David hadn't called me. David had no idea where I was. I'd made sure of that, changing my phone number after the divorce was finalized, telling only my mother and closest friends where I was going. Whatever was outside, it wasn't David. "Go away," I said, my voice shaking. "You're not David. I don't know what you are, but you're not him." The voice changed then, dropping all pretense of humanity, becoming once again the hollow, raspy tone of the old woman, but now with an underlying growl that raised the hair on my arms. "Clever girl, but not clever enough to save yourself. I have all night, child. All night and all the nights after. The Rangers won't come tomorrow, or the next day, or ever. This is my forest. Mine." The assault on the cabin intensified. The windows rattled in their frames. The roof creaked alarmingly under repeated impacts. The smoke from the fireplace grew thicker despite my attempts to improve the draft. And underneath it all, that constant, malevolent whispering. No longer from the pines outside, but seeming to come from the very logs of the cabin itself, as if the structure were speaking to me. Around midnight, one of the smaller windows shattered despite the blanket I'd tacked over it. I heard the glass break and rushed to the spot, knife held before me, Rusty barking frantically at my side. Through the jagged hole in the glass came a hand, not the gnarled, clawed appendage I'd seen earlier, but something worse. It was impossibly elongated, the fingers twice the length they should have been, jointed in too many places, the skin a sickly grayish white and covered in what looked like fine, dark hairs. The nails were black and curved, scraping against the window frame as the hand feeling blindly around the edges of the broken pane. I acted without thinking, bringing the knife down on the intruding appendage with all my strength. There was resistance, then a give as the blade bit into something solid. A shriek erupted from outside, high-pitched and inhuman in its rage and pain. The hand withdrew, taking my knife with it, pulled through the broken window before I could maintain my grip. Black liquid splattered the window frame and dripped onto the floor. Not blood, or at least not any blood I recognized, but something darker, thicker, with a pungent, rotting smell that immediately filled the cabin. The attack on the cabin ceased abruptly after that. The scratching, the pounding, the voices, all stopped, leaving an eerie silence broken only by Rusty's continued growling and my own ragged breathing. I didn't trust the silence. I maintained my vigil, moving from window to window, checking the door repeatedly, listening for any sound that might indicate the creature's return. The stench from the black fluid remained, growing stronger as the hours passed, forcing me to breathe through my mouth. Dawn came at last, gray light slowly filtering through the trees. As on the previous morning, I waited well past sunrise before daring to look outside. The clearing was empty again, peaceful except for one disturbing detail, a trail of the black fluid leading from beneath the broken window into the forest, occasionally pooling where the creature had apparently paused in its retreat. I should have stayed in the cabin. I should have waited for the Rangers, assuming they would actually come. But after 2 nights of terror, rationality was not my strong suit. All I could think was that I needed to get away from this place. Car or no car. I hastily packed a backpack with water, some food, the emergency radio, and a flashlight. I found a heavy iron fireplace poker to serve as both weapon and walking stick. Then, with Rusty on a short leash beside me, I stepped out of the cabin into the morning light. My plan, such as it was, involved following the dirt road back to the main highway, where I would hopefully encounter other travelers who could help me. Even if I had to walk all 15 miles to Eustis, it seemed preferable to spending another night in that cabin. I deliberately avoided looking at the trail of black fluid leading into the forest, focusing instead on the road ahead. We set out at a brisk pace, the morning still cool enough to make walking comfortable. I kept the radio on, tuned to the ranger station's frequency, hoping to hear news of someone coming to my aid, but it remained stubbornly silent. We'd been walking for perhaps an hour when Rusty suddenly stopped, his body going rigid. A low growl rumbled in his chest as he stared intently into the trees to our right. I followed his gaze and felt my heart stutter. Just visible among the pines was a figure. Not the old woman this time, but a man. He stood unnaturally still, partially hidden behind a tree trunk, but I could make out enough to see that he wore what appeared to be hunting clothing, the orange vest bright among the green of the forest. "Hello?" I called cautiously, tightening my grip on both the leash and the fireplace poker. "Can you help me? My car broke down at a cabin back there." The figure didn't respond or move. Rusty's growl deepened. "Hello?" I tried again, taking a single step toward the trees. "Sir?" The man stepped sideways, moving fully behind the tree and out of my sight. "Wait!" I called, momentarily forgetting my fear and my desperation for human contact, for help. I moved quickly to the side of the road, peering into the trees where he'd been standing. There was no one there. No sign that anyone had been there at all. No disturbed undergrowth. No footprints in the patches of soft earth. Just trees and silence. A cold certainty settled in my stomach. Whatever had visited the cabin last night, whatever had nearly broken in despite my precautions, it wasn't done with me. It was still out there, still watching, still hunting, and apparently it could take different forms. I returned to the road and resumed walking, faster now, constantly scanning the forest on either side. Rusty remained tense, occasionally growling at shadows among the trees. I saw no one else, but the feeling of being watched, of being followed, intensified with every step. The dirt road seemed longer than I remembered from my drive in. What should have been 7 miles to the main highway stretched endlessly before me, the landscape beginning to take on a strange sameness, as if I were passing the same sections of forest repeatedly. My watch indicated we'd been walking for over 3 hours when I finally had to face a disturbing possibility. I was no longer on the road I thought I was on. Somehow, I'd taken a wrong turn, or the road itself had changed. The rational part of my mind rejected this idea as impossible. But after what I'd experienced at the cabin, my definition of impossible had been significantly revised. I stopped and pulled out the crude map I'd brought with me. It showed only the cabin, the main highway, and the hiking trail. Not enough detail to help if I'd somehow strayed onto a logging road or firebreak that wasn't marked. The sun, now high overhead, provided some directional guidance, but without knowing which road I was actually on, this information wasn't particularly useful. As I stood there, deliberating, I became aware of a sound in the distance behind me. A vehicle's engine. Relief flooded through me. Someone was coming. Someone who could help. I turned, ready to flag down the approaching car or truck, only to freeze in confusion. The road behind me was empty, stretching straight for at least a quarter mile before bending around a stand of pines. But the sound of an engine was unmistakable and growing louder. Rusty whined, pressing against my legs, his eyes fixed on the empty road. Then, impossibly, a vehicle rounded the bend. My vehicle, my small blue Honda CR-V, the one I'd left with a dead battery back at the cabin. It moved steadily toward us, dust rising from the dirt road beneath its tires. I stood transfixed, unable to process what I was seeing. As the car drew closer, I could make out a figure behind the wheel, a silhouette that appeared to be female, with long hair. The sun glinted off the windshield, making it impossible to see more details. The car slowed as it approached, coming to a stop about 20 feet away. The engine idled roughly, sputtering in a way it never had before. The driver's door opened slowly, and a leg emerged, then another, then the full figure of a woman unfolding from the driver's seat. It was me, or something wearing my appearance, my height, my brown hair, my features arranged in a smile that was just slightly too wide, too fixed. She, wore an exact duplicate of my outfit, down to the small tear in the sleeve of my jacket that I'd acquired climbing through a barbed wire fence last month. "Rebecca," my doppelganger called, her voice a perfect mimicry of my own. "Thank goodness I found you. I've been so worried." Beside me, Rusty erupted into frenzied barking, lunging against his leash so violently that I nearly lost my grip. He'd never reacted to me that way, because, of course, this wasn't me. This was something else entirely, something that had decided that the forms of an old woman and a hunter hadn't been effective enough. "Rebecca," it called again, taking a step toward me, still wearing that frozen smile. "Your dog seems upset." Perhaps you should calm him down." "Stay back," I warned, raising the fireplace poker. "Whatever you are, stay away from us." The thing wearing my face tilted its head at an angle no human neck should permit. "Is that any way to talk to yourself?" it asked, the smile stretching wider, until it seemed to reach its ears. "After all, I'm only trying to help. The forest isn't safe. You should come with me." "No," I said firmly, despite the terror coursing through me. "You're not me. You're not human. Leave us alone." The thing's smile faltered slightly. Its eyes, my eyes but somehow wrong, with pupils too large and irises too pale, narrowing. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," it said, its voice developing an undertone similar to the raspy quality I'd heard at the cabin. "So much harder." It took another step forward. I backed up, maintaining the distance between us, keeping a firm grip on both the leash and the poker. "The old ways are best," it continued, its voice shifting further away from mine, becoming that hollow, aged tone from the cabin. "I tried to do this gently. I offered you a quick end, but now—" It gestured at my body. "Now I'll wear your skin back to the city. Your friends won't notice the difference. Not until it's too late." As it spoke, its appearance began to change subtly, the skin taking on a grayish tinge, the limbs elongating slightly, the fingers extending unnaturally. My features seemed to melt and reform, as if the thing couldn't quite maintain the illusion it had created. I knew with absolute certainty that if I stayed, if I hesitated even a moment longer, I would die here on this lonely road, and something wearing a version of my face would return to Boston in my place. Something that would hunt my friends, my family, using their trust in me to get close to them. I ran. I turned and sprinted down the road, dragging Rusty with me for the first few steps before he caught on and began running at my side. Behind us, I heard not footsteps, but a strange scuttling sound, too rapid and too numerous to be made by anything running on two legs. I didn't look back. Some instinctual part of me knew that seeing whatever was pursuing us in its true form might break something in my mind, might paralyze me with terror at a moment when movement was my only hope of survival. We ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to buckle. The scuttling sound remained behind us, neither gaining nor falling behind, as if the thing were pacing us, playing with us. When I could run no further, I veered off the road into the forest, hoping to lose our pursuer among the trees. Rusty followed, apparently understanding the desperate nature of our flight. We crashed through underbrush, scrambled over fallen logs, pushed through dense patches of young pines that scratched at my face and caught in my hair. The sounds of pursuit changed, becoming more distributed, as if whatever was following us had split into multiple entities, or perhaps had always been multiple entities working in concert. The whispering I'd first noticed on the hiking trail returned, louder now, more insistent, coming from all around us. "Can't escape. Playing with you. Ours now." I stumbled into a small clearing and stopped, gasping for breath, trying to orient myself. The forest looked the same in every direction. Endless pines, granite outcroppings, tangles of underbrush. The sun, which should have been directly overhead at this time of day, was nowhere to be seen. The sky above the clearing a uniform gray as if heavy clouds had moved in, though I'd seen no sign of an approaching storm earlier. Rusty growled, turning in circles, his hackles raised. The whispering grew louder, and with it came movement at the edges of the clearing, shadows shifting among the trees, never quite resolving into distinct forms but suggesting presences just out of clear sight. I gripped the fireplace poker tightly, knowing it was an inadequate weapon against whatever surrounded us but unwilling to relinquish even this small measure of defense. My breath came in ragged gasps, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. A figure stepped into the clearing, the old woman again, but now I could see her more clearly in the diffuse gray light. She was more corpse than living being, her skin not just pale but mottled with patches of decay, Her hair not just gray but white and falling out in clumps, her eyes sunken into dark sockets but glowing with an unhealthy green light. Her nightgown was not just tattered but rotted, hanging in strips from her emaciated frame. And her hands, those terrible hands with their elongated fingers and black curved nails, were stained with what looked like the same dark fluid I'd seen at the cabin. "Nowhere left to run, child," she rasped, her mouth barely moving as the words emerged. "The forest has you now. My forest." More figures emerged from the trees to stand beside her. The hunter I'd seen earlier, but now, with a gaping wound where his face should have been, my doppelganger, its features continually shifting and flowing as if unable to settle on a single appearance. And others, figures in various states of decay and transformation, some recognizably human in origin, others not. They formed a loose circle around Rusty and me, closing in with a slow, inexorable patience, secure in the knowledge that we had nowhere to go, no chance of escape. "Please," I begged, though I knew it was futile, "what do you want from me?" The old woman tilted her head, a terrible smile stretching across her decaying face. "Want? We want what we've always wanted. New blood, new life. The forest hungers, child. It's been too long since someone came to feed it." One of the other figures, a young man with half his skull caved in and pine needles growing from the wound, spoke in a voice like crumbling leaves. "The sacrifice keeps us here, keeps us alive after a fashion." "Keeps her strong," added another, a woman in hiking clothes so old and weathered they might have been from decades past. "The guardian of whispering pines. Our mistress, our mother." The old woman's smile widened impossibly further. "These woods have always been special, child. Sacred, some might say. The native peoples knew. They left offerings here, animal blood mostly, sometimes their own. But then the white settlers came, cut down the old growth, built their cabins and their roads. The forest grew angry, hungry." She took a shambling step closer. "I was the first, you know, Eleanor Blackwood, 1887. I came to these woods to gather herbs. I was a midwife in Eustis. The forest took me, remade me, and now I gather others for it." My mind raced frantically, searching for a way out, any possibility of escape. The circle was nearly complete now, the figures only a few yards away on all sides. Rusty pressed against my legs, his growls now interspersed with whimpers of fear. As my gaze darted desperately from one horror to another, I noticed something. A small gap in the circle, between the hunter and another figure. A gap that led to what appeared to be a trail, narrow and overgrown but distinct from the surrounding forest. Eleanor, the thing that had once been Eleanor, followed my gaze and hissed, "No, not that way. That path is not for you." Her reaction told me everything I needed to know. Whatever that path was, it represented my only chance. I lunged suddenly, swinging the fireplace poker in a wide arc before me. The figures nearest the gap fell back, more in surprise than fear, giving me the opening I needed. I bolted through, Rusty right beside me, and sprinted for the trail. Behind us erupted a chorus of inhuman shrieks and howls, the sound of multiple creatures giving chase. The trail was barely visible, marked only by slightly less dense vegetation and the occasional stone that might once have been placed deliberately to mark the way. I followed it blindly, driven by pure terror, the poker still clutched in my white-knuckled grip. The path twisted and turned through the forest, at times nearly disappearing among the undergrowth before becoming clear again. All the while, the sounds of pursuit continued behind us, sometimes seeming to fall back, other times drawing alarmingly near. We'd been running for what felt like an eternity when the trail suddenly opened onto another clearing, this one different from any I'd seen before in these woods. At its center stood a massive, ancient pine, so tall and wide it dwarfed every other tree I'd encountered. Its bark was dark, almost black, and carved into it were symbols I didn't recognize. Spirals, angular shapes, patterns that hurt my eyes if I looked at them too long. At the base of the tree lay a flat stone, stained dark with what could only be centuries of blood, an altar. This was an altar of some kind, and the massive pine was its focus. The sounds of pursuit were closing in rapidly. I had only moments to decide what to do. The trail continued on the other side of the clearing, disappearing again into the dense forest, but I doubted I had the strength to keep running. My legs trembled with exhaustion, my lungs burned, and even Rusty was panting heavily, his earlier energy flagging. My gaze fell on the fireplace poker still clutched in my hand, then moved to the ancient tree with its disturbing carvings. An idea formed. Desperate, possibly suicidal, but the only option I could see. I stumbled to the tree and, with the last of my strength, began attacking the carvings with the pointed end of the poker, gouging deep into the symbols, disrupting their patterns. The wood beneath the bark was surprisingly soft, almost spongy, and a thick, dark fluid began to ooze from the wounds I inflicted, the same black substance I'd seen at the cabin. The effect was immediate and terrifying. A sound like a scream erupted from the tree itself, so loud it seemed to shake the very air around me. The ground beneath my feet trembled. The whispering that had been a constant background noise since I'd entered these woods rose to a shrieking cacophony of rage and pain. The figures that had been pursuing us burst into the clearing just as I destroyed the last symbol, driving the poker deep into the heart of the pattern. They froze at the edge of the clearing, their faces, those that had faces, contorted in expressions of horror and disbelief. Eleanor Blackwood, at the front of the group, let out a wail of fury. "What have you done, you foolish child? What have you done?" The tree was bleeding freely now, the black fluid pouring from the gouges I'd made, pooling around its massive trunk. The ground continued to shake, more violently now, and cracks began to appear in the earth around the altar stone. "You've broken the pact," Eleanor shrieked, her form seeming to flicker and waver like a bad television signal. "The binding that keeps us here, that keeps Ite here." All around us, the forest was changing. Trees began to creak and groan, some tilting at dangerous angles as the ground shifted beneath them. The gray sky above the clearing darkened further, clouds swirling in unnatural patterns. The figures at the edge of the clearing were changing too, becoming less solid, their forms blurring and dissipating like smoke in a strong wind. Some howled in what sounded like pain, others seemed almost relieved, their faces briefly taking on peaceful expressions before fading away entirely. Eleanor was the last to go, her ancient form resisting the dissolution that claimed the others. She fixed me with her glowing green eyes, hatred burning in their depths. "You think you've won," she hissed, her voice still audible even as her body became increasingly transparent. "You think you freed us, but you've only freed it, the thing beneath the forest, the thing that made me what I am. And now there's nothing to control it, nothing to direct its hunger." She laughed then, a terrible sound that echoed through the clearing long after her form had faded completely from view. "Run, Rebecca Hill, run while you can, because it's coming, and it's so much worse than we ever were." The ground gave a final, violent heave, and the massive pine began to tilt, its roots tearing free of the earth with a sound like ripping fabric. I scrambled backward, calling frantically for Rusty, who had retreated to the edge of the clearing. As the ancient tree crashed to the ground, the earth where it had stood continued to tear open, the crack widening into a gaping hole from which poured more of the black fluid, gallons of it, a veritable river of the foul-smelling substance. And with it came something else, something rising from the depths that I caught only a glimpse of, a vast shape, glistening and dark with too many limbs moving in too many directions, and at its center, what might have been a face but was too alien, too wrong to properly process. I didn't wait to see more. Grabbing Rusty's leash, I sprinted for the continuation of the trail on the far side of the clearing, the sound of something massive emerging from the earth behind me providing all the motivation I needed. We ran blindly, the trail now clearer than before, as if whatever enchantment had kept it hidden had died with Eleanor and her cohorts. Behind us, the sounds of destruction continued. Trees falling, earth shifting, and underneath it all, a deep, resonant sound that might have been breathing or laughter or something for which human language has no name. The trail ended abruptly at a paved road, not the dirt logging road I'd been on earlier, but a proper highway with lane markings and guardrails. And there, parked on the shoulder, was a Maine Forest Service truck, its engine running, a uniformed ranger standing beside it looking out into the forest with an expression of concern. "Hey," he called as Rusty and I burst from the tree line. "Are you Rebecca Hill? We got a call about a stranded... Jesus Christ. Are you okay?" I must have been a sight. Clothes torn, face scratched from branches, hair wild, eyes wide with terror. I couldn't even speak, could only nod frantically and gesture back toward the forest, where the sounds of destruction were growing louder. The ranger, a middle-aged man whose nameplate read Sullivan, didn't waste time asking questions. He bundled Rusty and me into his truck and pulled away from the shoulder with a spray of gravel, tires squealing as he accelerated down the highway. "What happened back there?" he asked, glancing in his rearview mirror at the tree line, which was now visibly moving, trees swaying and falling as if in a localized hurricane. "Earthquake? Landslide?" I shook my head, still struggling to catch my breath. Something in the forest. Something old. Something hungry. Sullivan shot me a strange look, part concern, part something else. Recognition, perhaps, or confirmation of something long suspected. "Whispering Pines," he said quietly. "You were in Whispering Pines." I nodded. He pressed harder on the accelerator. "That area's been off limits for years. Signs all around it. Didn't you see them?" "No," I said, thinking of the crude map the cabin owner had provided. The trail marked as Whispering Pines Loop, with no warnings, no indications of danger. There were no signs where I was. Sullivan was silent for a long moment, his gaze flicking repeatedly to the rearview mirror. "Someone led you there," he finally said. "Someone who knew what they were doing." A chill ran down my spine as I thought of the cabin listing, the poetic description that had drawn me in. The owner I'd never met in person, communicating only through a property rental app. "Why?" I asked. "Why would someone do that?" Sullivan's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "Sacrifice," he said grimly. "Every few years, something happens up there. Hikers disappear. Cabins are found empty. Been going on as long as there have been records in these parts. Old Eleanor Blackwood was the first documented case back in the 1880s. My blood ran cold at the name. "You know about her?" Sullivan nodded, his eyes still on the mirror. "Local legend. Midwife who went into the woods and never came out. Some say she became a witch, taking people for her dark rituals. Others say the forest itself took her, made her its guardian." "Both," I whispered. "It was both." Sullivan finally tore his gaze from the mirror to look at me directly. "We need to get you to Eustis. There's people there, old-timers who know about the pines. They'll want to hear what you saw, what you experienced. Might be important." I nodded numbly, one hand stroking Rusty's fur for comfort. The golden retriever was pressed against my side, still trembling slightly but calmer now that we were away from the forest. "Most importantly," Sullivan continued, "they'll want to know how you escaped. Because as far as I know, once the pines mark someone as a sacrifice, they don't get away. Not ever." I thought of the trail I'd found, the gap in the circle of monsters, Eleanor's reaction when she saw where I was heading. I think they made a mistake," I said slowly. "They were so used to people being helpless, being victims, that they didn't guard the one path out carefully enough. Or perhaps, a small voice in my mind suggested, something else had wanted me to find that path. Something that wanted to be free of its bonds beneath the ancient tree. Something that had used me as a tool to break a pact formed centuries ago. I pushed the thought away. It didn't matter now. All that mattered was that Rusty and I had survived, had escaped the whispering pines and whatever ancient horror dwelled within them. But as I glanced out the rear window of the ranger's truck, I couldn't help but notice a strange dark mist rising above the tree line in the distance. My name is Thomas Davis, and I am 34 years old. This happened in Baxter State Park, Maine, just last fall. I've always been what you might call a loner. After my divorce 3 years ago, I threw myself into my work as a wildlife photographer, finding solace in the isolation of nature rather than the company of people. My German Shepherd, Rusty, became my only reliable companion. We understood each other in ways I could never explain to another human being. When my editor at Wilderness Explorer commissioned me to capture the fall foliage in Maine's most remote corners, I jumped at the opportunity. The assignment was straightforward. Spend 2 weeks in Baxter State Park documenting the changing colors and wildlife preparing for winter. What wasn't straightforward was what waited for us there. The first 3 days were uneventful. Rusty and I hiked the established trails by day and camped in designated areas by night. The foliage was spectacular. Crimson maples alongside golden birches created a canopy that filtered sunlight into shimmering pools on the forest floor. I captured hundreds of images, but my editor had specifically requested shots from the more isolated northern sections where tourists rarely ventured. That's how we found ourselves on the Hollow Trail, an unmarked path that a local ranger had mentioned in passing. "It's not on the maps," he'd said, tapping his temple knowingly. Local knowledge. If you want untouched scenery, that's where you'll find it. Just be sure to come back before dark. He'd chuckled then, a sound that should have warned me, but I dismissed it as small-town superstition. The Hollow Trail began innocuously enough, a barely visible path winding through increasingly dense forest. The trees grew closer together here, their trunks wrapped in moss so thick it muffled our footsteps. The silence was oppressive, broken only by Rusty's occasional snuffling as he investigated unfamiliar scents. By midday, we reached a small clearing beside a brook. I set up my tripod to capture the water tumbling over lichen-covered rocks. The sound of rushing water was soothing, almost hypnotic, and I lost track of time adjusting my settings to capture the perfect shot. I only realized something was wrong when I noticed Rusty's behavior. He stood rigid at the clearing's edge, hackles raised, staring into the dense undergrowth. A low growl rumbled from his chest. "What is it, boy?" I called, but he didn't respond, his attention fixed on something I couldn't see. Then I heard it, a whisper so faint I thought it might be the wind through the leaves. But there was no breeze that day. The air hung heavy and still. Thomas. My name, spoken so softly it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Rusty's growl deepened. "Hello?" I called, reaching for the bear spray attached to my belt. "Is someone there?" No response came, but the feeling of being watched intensified. I packed my equipment quickly, suddenly eager to return to the populated trails. "Come on, Rusty, let's head back." We'd walked for perhaps 20 minutes when I realized the path no longer looked familiar. The trees seemed different somehow. Taller, older, with gnarled branches that reached toward us like arthritic fingers. My GPS showed no signal, and when I checked my phone, the battery had drained completely despite being fully charged that morning. "This isn't right," I muttered, pulling out my compass. The needle spun wildly, never settling on a direction. Something cold settled in the pit of my stomach. I'd been hiking wilderness trails for 15 years and had never lost my way before. As daylight began to fade, panic set in. We needed to find shelter before nightfall. I spotted a small hollow beneath a massive oak and decided it would have to do. After gathering firewood, I managed to start a small blaze, though the flames burned with an odd bluish tint that I attributed to moisture in the wood. Rusty refused to settle, pacing the perimeter of our makeshift camp, occasionally freezing to stare into the darkening forest. I shared some beef jerky with him, but he only took it to please me, dropping it uneaten beside him as he resumed his vigilant watch. Night fell with unnatural swiftness, plunging the forest into darkness so complete it felt solid. My fire cast bizarre shadows that seemed to move independently of the flame's flicker. The temperature dropped rapidly, my breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Sleep was impossible. Every crack of a twig or rustle of leaves had me reaching for my flashlight, its beam seeming to penetrate only inches into the oppressive blackness. Sometime around what must have been midnight, Rusty began to whine, a sound I'd never heard him make before, high-pitched and frightened. "It's okay, boy," I whispered, pulling him close, as much for my comfort as his. "We'll find our way back in the morning." That's when we heard the singing. It was a woman's voice, lilting and beautiful, singing words in a language I didn't recognize. The melody was haunting, rising and falling like gentle waves. Against all reason, I felt drawn to it. Rusty had other ideas. He bared his teeth, a snarl building in his chest as the singing grew closer. I strained my eyes against the darkness but could see nothing beyond our small circle of firelight. Then she appeared, stepping into the light so suddenly it seemed she had materialized from the darkness itself. An elderly woman, her face a maze of deep wrinkles, silver hair hanging loose to her waist. She wore a dress that might once have been white but was now stained with dirt and something darker that looked uncomfortably like dried blood. Her feet were bare despite the cold, caked with mud up to her ankles. "Lost, are ye?" Her voice was thin but carried clearly. Up close, her singing had transformed into ordinary speech, the haunting melody gone as if it had never existed. "Yes," I admitted, rising to my feet. "We took a wrong turn on the hollow trail. Do you live nearby? Could you point us toward the main path?" The old woman's laugh was like dry leaves scraping across stone. "The hollow trail has no wrong turns, young man. It takes you where you're meant to go." She tilted her head, studying me with eyes that reflected the firelight like a cat's. "You can call me Agnes. Agnes Brewster." "Thomas Davis," I replied automatically, then immediately regretted giving her my name. Something about the way she smiled when I said it sent chills through me. "I know," she said, her grin widening to reveal teeth that were too white, too perfect for such an aged face. "The forest told me. It speaks of those who trespass." "We're not trespassing," I said firmly, though unease coiled in my stomach. "This is public land," Agnes laughed again. "This part hasn't been public since 1879, when my grandfather claimed it with blood." Rusty growled, low and threatening, positioning himself between me and the woman. For the first time, she looked uncertain. "Your beast doesn't like me," she observed. "He's protective," I said, resting my hand on Rusty's head. "We should get some rest. In the morning, we'll find our way back." Agnes shook her head slowly. "Not without help. The Hollow wants you, Thomas Davis. It's been so long since someone strayed this deep." She extended one gnarled hand. "But I can guide you out, for a price." "What kind of price?" I asked warily. Her smile returned wider than seemed physically possible. "Just a small token, a memory, one you won't miss." Every instinct screamed danger. "I think we'll manage on our own, thanks." Her expression hardened, the friendly facade dropping away. "You won't. None do. But the offer stands for now." She backed away, melting into the darkness beyond my fire's light. "Listen for my singing when you change your mind." I didn't sleep that night, keeping the fire burning until dawn broke, or what passed for dawn in that strange, muted forest. The sunlight that filtered through the canopy was weak and gray, as if seen through dirty glass. We set off in what I hoped was eastward, toward the main trail. Hours passed as we pushed through increasingly dense undergrowth. The forest seemed to be actively working against us, branches snagging my clothes and vines appearing underfoot to trip me. Rusty stayed close, his usual exploring nature suppressed by the oppressive atmosphere. Around midday, we stumbled upon a small cabin nestled between two massive pines. Smoke curled from a stone chimney, and the windows glowed with warm light. Relief flooded through me at this sign of human habitation. I approached and knocked on the weathered door. It swung open to reveal a man in his 60s, bearded and suspicious, a shotgun held casually at his side. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, eyes narrowing. "I'm lost," I explained quickly, keeping my hands visible. "My dog and I were hiking and got turned around. Is there a way back to the main trails from here?" The man studied me for a long moment, then looked at Rusty, who had remained uncharacteristically quiet. Something in his expression changed. "You came from the hollow trail." It wasn't a question. I nodded. "And you met her? Agnes." Again, not a question. "How did you know?" I asked. He sighed heavily, stepping back. "Better come inside. Name's Harold Tanner. Been living out here 30 years now." The cabin's interior was Spartan but comfortable. A wood stove radiating heat, handmade furniture, shelves lined with preserved foods and dog-eared books. Harold gestured for me to sit at a rough-hewn table while he poured coffee from a pot that simmered on the stove. "You're not the first to wander off that trail," he said, placing a steaming mug before me. "Most don't make it this far." "What do you mean?" Harold sat heavily across from me. "The hollow trail isn't a normal path. It shifts, changes. Those who walk it find what they're looking for, even if they don't know they're looking." I took a careful sip of the coffee, strong and bitter. That doesn't make any sense. Doesn't have to make sense to be true. Harold shrugged. Agnes Brewster died in 1932, hanged for witchcraft after 6 children disappeared. They found her with their hearts arranged in a circle around her body. My blood ran cold. "That's impossible. I just spoke with her last night." Harold nodded as if this confirmed something. "She made you an offer, didn't she? To guide you out for a price." "A memory," I whispered. "It's never just one," Harold said grimly. "She takes the one that matters most, then uses it to hollow you out. Takes more and more until there's nothing left of who you were." He tapped his temple. "Had a wife once. Children too, I think. Can't remember their faces anymore." I stared at him in horror. "But you're still... you." A sad smile crossed his weathered face. "Am I? I know I gave her something important. Can feel the absence like a missing limb. I stay here now because I don't know where else to go. Don't know who might be waiting for me." Rusty whined softly, pressing against my leg. I scratched his ears absently, mind racing. "How do we get out?" "There's an old logging road about 2 miles north of here. Leads eventually to Route 11. But," Harold leaned forward, expression grave, "she'll try to stop you. The closer you get to leaving her territory, the more desperate she'll become." I nodded, rising to my feet. "Thank you for the coffee and the information. We should get moving if we want to reach the road before dark." Harold reached under the table and pulled out a cloth-wrapped bundle. "Take this. Old silver knife. Legend says the Brewsters can't abide silver touching their skin. Don't know if it's true, but might give you a fighting chance." The knife was heavy in my hand, the handle worn smooth by years of use. I tucked it into my belt with a nod of thanks. As we prepared to leave, Harold caught my arm. "One more thing. If you hear singing, block your ears. The song pulls at the memories she wants to take. Listen too long, and you'll offer them up freely." The journey north was arduous. The forest grew denser, the ground becoming boggy in places. Dark clouds gathered overhead, and by mid-afternoon, a fine, cold rain began to fall. We pressed on, Rusty leading the way, his nose to the ground as if following a scent I couldn't detect. The first sign of trouble came when I noticed footprints in the mud beside our own, small barefoot impressions that appeared between one step and the next. I quickened our pace, a sense of urgency building within me. Then came the singing, just as Harold had warned, distant at first, then growing closer. The melody wrapped around me like silken threads, tugging at something deep in my mind. Images flashed before me, My ex-wife's smile on our wedding day, the feeling of her hand in mine, the exact moment I knew our marriage was over. I shook my head violently, remembering Harold's warning. Pulling my scarf loose, I tore it in half and stuffed pieces into my ears. The singing became muffled but still audible, a persistent, seductive call. Rusty growled, hackles rising as a figure emerged from between the trees ahead. Agnes stood blocking our path, her white dress now sodden and clinging to her skeletal frame. Her smile was predatory. "Running away so soon, Thomas?" she called, her voice somehow penetrating my makeshift earplugs. "After I offered my help?" "We don't need your help," I replied, my hand moving to the knife at my belt. "We know the way out." Her eyes narrowed, flashing with malice. "That old fool Tanner. Always interfering." She took a step closer. "But he's forgotten so much already. Soon he'll forget to eat, to breathe, and he'll join me properly." "Stay back," I warned, drawing the knife. The silver blade gleamed dully in the fading light. Agnes hissed at the sight of it, her face contorting into something inhuman, skin stretching tight over protruding bones, eyes sinking into darkened sockets. "You think a knife will save you?" she snarled, her voice no longer sweet but grating and harsh. "The Hollow has claimed you. Your memories are already mine." She lunged with impossible speed for a woman who appeared so elderly. I stumbled backward, slashing wildly with the knife. The blade passed through empty air as she seemed to shift like smoke, reforming just beyond my reach. Rusty sprang forward with a ferocious bark, teeth bared. Agnes shrieked as his jaws clamped around her arm. Where he touched her, her flesh seemed to ripple and dissolve, black ichor spurting from the wound instead of blood. She flung out her uninjured hand, and an invisible force sent Rusty flying backwards. He hit a tree with a yelp that tore at my heart, then crumpled to the ground, motionless. "Rusty!" I screamed, terror and rage boiling within me. Agnes advanced on me, her injured arm already reforming, the black substance retracting back into her skin. "His memory will be the first I take from you," she whispered, her voice once again melodic and enticing. "You won't even remember his name when I'm done." Something snapped inside me. The thought of forgetting Rusty, my loyal companion who had helped me through the darkest days after my divorce, was unbearable. I gripped the silver knife tightly and charged forward. Agnes's eyes widened in surprise at my direct attack. She tried to dissolve again, but I had anticipated the move. I changed direction mid-stride and plunged the knife into her chest as she began to reform. The scream she released was not human, a high, keening wail that seemed to emanate from the forest itself. The silver blade sank deep, and where it touched her, her flesh blackened and crumbled like burnt paper. She clawed at me, her nails leaving burning furrows across my cheek, but I held firm, driving the knife deeper. "The Hollow will never release you," she gasped, her voice distorting as her form began to collapse inward. "You'll wander these woods forever." With a final rattling breath, Agnes Brewster crumbled into a pile of desiccated leaves and dirt, the white dress deflating as if it had never contained a body at all. The knife clattered to the ground, its blade now tarnished and dull. I rushed to Rusty's side, heart pounding with fear. To my immense relief, he was breathing, his eyes fluttering open as I gently examined him for injuries. He whined softly, licking my hand. "You saved me, boy," I whispered, burying my face in his fur. "We're going home now." The rest of our journey passed in a blur of exhaustion and pain. The logging road appeared just where Harold had said it would, and by nightfall, we reached Route 11. A passing truck driver stopped to help, surprised to find anyone emerging from those woods so late in the year. "Folks around here don't go near the old Brewster property," he commented as he drove us to the nearest town. "Not since those hikers disappeared back in '98. I said nothing, cradling Rusty's head in my lap. The wounds on my cheek burned, and in the truck's rearview mirror I could see they were forming patterns like gnarled tree branches across my skin. We made it back to civilization, but something followed us from the hollow trail. Sometimes, in my dreams, I hear singing and wake to find leaves scattered across my bedroom floor. Rusty refuses to leave my side, growling at shadows that seem deeper than they should be. The photos from that day never developed properly, just blurry images of trees and a white shape that could be mist or something else entirely. My editor was disappointed, but I couldn't bring myself to explain or to return for better shots. I know Agnes Brewster is still there, waiting in the woods. Harold Tanner, too, though I wonder how much of him remains. And sometimes when I look in the mirror, I catch myself trying to remember something important, something just beyond my grasp, like a name I once knew well but have somehow forgotten. The scar on my cheek grows a little each day, branching out like roots seeking soil, and I know, with a certainty that chills me to my core, that someday the hollow trail will call me back to claim what Agnes believes is rightfully hers. But until that day comes, I hold tight to my memories, especially of Rusty, whose presence reminds me of who I am. Thomas Davis, 34 years old, survivor of the hollow trail. For now, at least. My name is Sarah Rodriguez, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the northern reaches of Maine's Allagash wilderness, where the trees grow so dense they seem to swallow the sky. I never should have gone back to Maine. Not after what happened to my brother there 5 years ago. Missing, presumed dead, that's what the official report said. But I knew better. The voicemail he left me that night told a different story, one of whispers in the dark and something following him through the trees. The police dismissed it as the ravings of a man suffering from exposure, but I couldn't forget the raw terror in his voice. When my therapist suggested exposure therapy, facing the wilderness that had taken Tommy, I reluctantly agreed. She said it might help with the nightmares, the panic attacks that came whenever I saw dense woods. I'd been a natural outdoors woman before Tommy disappeared. Now I couldn't even walk through Central Park without my heart threatening to burst from my chest. "You need to reclaim that part of yourself, Dr. Hart," Wiesman had said. "Just a short solo camping trip. 2 nights, that's all." The Hollow Creek Trail was supposed to be easy, manageable, safe. That's what the park ranger at the Allagash Visitor Center told me as he pointed it out on the map. Pretty popular route, well marked, goes by Foster Lake. "Beautiful spot," Ranger Simmons said, his weathered face crinkling into a smile. He looked to be in his 60s, with kind eyes that had seen decades of these woods. "Got your bear spray?" I patted my backpack. "And a satellite phone." "Smart girl. Cell service is non-existent once you're past the ridge." He studied me for a moment. "You hiking alone?" "Yes." I hesitated. My brother used to love these trails. Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition. "What was his name?" "Tommy Rodriguez. He was up here 5 years ago when he went missing." The ranger's smile vanished. "I remember that case. Terrible business. They never found him, did they?" I shook my head. "The Allagash is beautiful, but she can be unforgiving." He marked something on my map. "There's a ranger station here, about halfway through your route. Gary Moskowitz mans it. Good man. Stop by. Let him know you're passing through." I thanked him and headed out, my boots crunching on the gravel parking lot as I approached the trailhead. A wooden sign marked the entrance to Hollow Creek Trail, the paint faded from years of harsh Maine winters. Below it, someone had nailed a small wooden placard with crude lettering, "The Hollows Watch." Great, just what my anxiety needed. The May air was crisp but not cold, the kind of perfect spring day that makes you feel like you can breathe deeper than normal. Birch trees lined the beginning of the trail, their white bark peeling like paper, giving way to towering pines as the elevation increased. The trail was well maintained, just as Ranger Simmons had promised, wide enough that I didn't feel closed in. My therapist had given me techniques for when the panic started to rise. Name 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste. I ran through them automatically as I hiked. See, dappled sunlight through the canopy. A chipmunk darting across the path. White quartz pebbles embedded in the trail. My boots against the dirt. A red trail marker on an oak tree. Touch. The padded straps of my backpack. The smooth grip of my trekking poles. The sweat beading on my forehead. The zip of my jacket against my chin. Here. The crunch of leaves beneath my feet. The chatter of birds in the canopy. The whisper of wind through the… Wait. That wasn't wind. I stopped, my breath catching in my throat. There it was again. A sound like speech, but not quite. More like the suggestion of words, riding the breeze from somewhere deeper in the forest. I turned slowly, scanning the wall of trees on either side of the trail. Hello. My voice sounded thin, childish. Nothing. Just imagination. The forest plays tricks. I knew this. I'd grown up camping with Tommy and our parents in the Berkshires. Forests make strange sounds. I continued hiking, trying to focus on my surroundings, on the beauty rather than the vastness. The trail began to climb steadily, and I welcomed the exertion, the way it forced my mind to focus on physical sensation rather than spinning anxious scenarios. By mid-afternoon, I'd made good progress. According to my map, Foster Lake was just ahead, and I'd planned to make camp on its eastern shore. As the trees thinned, I caught glimpses of water through the foliage, sunlight dancing on its surface. Relief flooded through me. I'd been promised that the lake was a popular camping spot, even this early in the season. Maybe there would be other hikers, other tents, other people to ward off the crushing solitude of the wilderness. The trail curved around a large boulder, and suddenly there it was, Foster Lake in all its glory, a perfect mirror reflecting the blue sky and surrounding pines. But my relief quickly faded. The shoreline was empty. No tents, no campfires, no fellow hikers. Just pristine wilderness, untouched and indifferent. I chose a flat area about 20 feet from the water's edge, sheltered by a stand of pines but with a clear view of the lake. Setting up my tent was a struggle. It had been years since I'd done this, but eventually I had a respectable campsite, tent secured, sleeping bag unrolled inside, a small fire pit ringed with stones. I even managed to get a fire going as dusk approached, the familiar ritual calming my nerves. As darkness fell, the sounds of the forest changed. Daytime birds went quiet, replaced by the occasional hoot of an owl, the distant yipping of coyotes. The fire cast dancing shadows across my campsite, and beyond its light, the darkness seemed absolute. I'd forgotten how dark it gets, away from city lights. Real darkness, the kind you can feel pressing against your skin. I cooked a simple dinner of dehydrated chili on my camp stove, the spicy smell momentarily masking the omnipresent scent of pine and earth. As I ate, I found myself speaking aloud, if only to hear a human voice. "See, Tommy? I'm doing it. I came back." My words fell flat in the vast silence. I thought about the voicemail he'd left me, the one I'd listened to so many times I had it memorized. "Sari, something's not right out here. I keep seeing. I don't know what I'm seeing, but I'm not alone. There's something in the trees, watching, following. I think…" Then a crash, a scream that still haunted my dreams, and silence. The investigators said he must have fallen, injured himself too badly to make it back to his camp. They searched for weeks. Professional search and rescue, volunteers, even a group that specialized in finding people lost in the wilderness. Nothing. No body, no backpack, no sign of Tommy. Just his tent, his campfire burned to ashes, and his phone lying on his sleeping bag, that final call to me still on the screen. I pushed the thoughts away, focusing instead on the flames of my fire. Dr. Wiseman had been right about one thing. Being here forced me to confront the fear instead of running from it. Whether that was healing or just a different kind of torture remained to be seen. As I was banking the fire for the night, I heard it again, that not quite whisper, coming from the darkness beyond my camp. I froze, the hairs on my arms rising despite the warmth of the fire. "Hello," I called, louder this time. "Is someone there?" The whisper stopped immediately. The forest seemed to hold its breath. I grabbed my flashlight, sweeping its beam in a wide arc around my campsite. The light caught nothing but trees, their trunks silver gray in the harsh LED beam. Just as I was about to turn away, something moved at the edge of the light. A shadow detaching from a tree, melting back into the darkness too quickly for me to make out its shape. My heart hammered against my ribs. Animal, I told myself. Has to be. Bear, maybe a moose. Maine has moose. But I knew deep down that what I'd seen hadn't moved like an animal. It had moved like a person. Someone watching. Sleep was nearly impossible. Every creak of branch, every rustle of leaves had me sitting bolt upright in my sleeping bag, straining to hear through the nylon walls of my tent. I kept my flashlight and bear spray close, one hand always on one or the other. When exhaustion finally claimed me, my dreams were fragments of memory and fear. Tommy's voice on the phone, the shadow by the tree, the whispers that might have been words. I woke before dawn, gritty-eyed and unrested. The sky was just beginning to lighten, turning the black of night to deep blue. Mist clung to the surface of the lake, giving the landscape an ethereal quality that might have been beautiful if I hadn't been so on edge. As I emerged from my tent, I noticed something immediately wrong. My campfire, which I'd carefully banked the night before, was now just cold ashes. That wasn't alarming in itself. Fires burn out. But arranged in the ashes, placed with obvious deliberation, was a small figurine made of twigs and pine needles bound with what looked like human hair. It resembled a crude stick person, about 6 inches tall. I recoiled, nearly tripping over my tent flap. Someone had been in my camp while I slept. The knowledge sent ice through my veins. I grabbed my bear spray, holding it out in front of me as I turned in a slow circle, scanning the trees. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking. "This isn't funny." No answer but the sudden flutter of birds startled from the canopy. With shaking hands, I broke camp, stuffing my sleeping bag haphazardly into its compression sack, collapsing my tent with none of the care I'd taken to set it up. The stick figure I left where it was, unwilling to touch it. Every few seconds I'd stop and listen, convinced I could hear movement in the undergrowth just beyond sight. According to my map, the ranger station that Simmons had marked was about 4 miles ahead. If I pushed hard, I could be there by mid-morning. The thought of another human presence, Ranger Moskowitz, gave me the push I needed to shoulder my pack and set off, my pace quicker than was probably wise on the uneven terrain. The trail began to climb again, steeper this time, winding up the side of what my map called Blackwood Ridge. The exertion and the brightening day should have eased my fear, but with every step deeper into the wilderness, the weight of being watched pressed heavier on me. Twice I spun around, certain I'd caught movement in my peripheral vision. Twice I saw nothing but the empty trail behind me. The third time, I glimpsed something duck behind a large spruce about 50 yards back. Something tall, person-shaped. "I see you," I yelled, anger momentarily overriding fear. "Stop following me." My words echoed back to me, mocking. I waited, bear spray extended, for whoever it was to reveal themselves. Minutes passed. Nothing moved. I started walking backwards for a while, unwilling to turn my back on the trail behind me, but after nearly twisting my ankle on a root, I had to face forward again. The feeling of eyes on my back was almost physical now, a pressure between my shoulder blades. The trail crested the ridge around noon, offering a breathtaking panoramic view of the Allagash wilderness. Miles of unbroken forest, waves of green stretching to the horizon, with the silver thread of a river winding through the valley below. In the distance, the hulking presence of Mount Katahdin dominated the skyline. Had Tommy seen this view? Had he stood in this exact spot feeling the same mix of awe and insignificance that I felt now? The ranger station should have been visible from here. Simmons had marked it just past the ridge, But I saw no structure, no clearing, nothing but more trees. I pulled out my map again, tracing the trail with my finger. I was in the right place. The station should be here. Unease bloomed into real fear. Had I somehow strayed from the trail? No, the markers were still visible, red blazes on the trees guiding the way forward. I checked my compass, still heading northeast, just as I should be. I continued down the other side of the ridge, moving slower now, scanning for any sign of the ranger station. The descent was steeper than the climb had been, the trail narrower, forcing me to pick my way carefully around jutting rocks and exposed roots. An hour later, I still hadn't found the station, but the trail emptied into a small clearing. At its center stood a dilapidated wooden structure that might once have been a cabin. Its roof had partially collapsed, and the windows were empty frames, the glass long gone. This couldn't be the ranger station. It looked abandoned for decades. I approached cautiously, the crunch of my boots on the leaf litter sounding obscenely loud in the quiet clearing. A wooden sign hung crookedly beside what remained of the door. Allagash Ranger, Outpost Numero 7. This was it. This was the station Simmons had marked, but it was clearly long abandoned. "Hello?" I called as I reached the sagging porch. "Ranger Moskowitz?" My only answer was the hollow echo of my voice inside the empty structure. I pushed the door, which swung inward with a groan of rusted hinges. The interior was a single room, dark and smelling of mold and rotting wood. Debris littered the warped floorboards, leaves blown in through the broken windows, the droppings of small animals, fragments of what might once have been furniture. But one thing caught my eye immediately. On what remained of a desk against the far wall sat a logbook, its cover weather-stained but intact. I crossed the room, floorboards creaking ominously beneath my weight, and picked it up. The most recent entry was dated 5 years ago, May 7th, 2019, written in a hurried scrawl. "Something's happening in the hollows. Third missing hiker this season. County says it's not in their jurisdiction. State police too busy with the Madison case. No one's coming. I'm going to check the caves myself. If anyone reads this, tell Sarah I'm sorry. T. Rodriguez." My brother's handwriting, my name. The logbook fell from my suddenly numb fingers. The room seemed to tilt and spin around me. This was impossible. Tommy was a software engineer from Boston. He wasn't a ranger. He had no connection to this place beyond his final, fatal camping trip. Yet here was his handwriting, addressing me directly. "Tell Sarah I'm sorry." Sorry for what? For disappearing? For dying? Or for something else entirely? I snatched up the logbook again, flipping frantically through the pages. Most entries were mundane. Weather reports, wildlife sightings, trail maintenance notes. The handwriting changed every few months, presumably as different rangers rotated through the station. And then, about 6 months before Tommy's entry, the tone began to change. November the 12th, 2018. Hikers reported strange sounds near Blackwater Caves. Investigated. Found nothing but did hear something like whispering. Probably just whined through the rock formations. G. Moskowitz. December 3rd, 2018. Another report of voices near the caves. This time from experienced locals, the Petersons. Not the type to spook easily. Will organize a proper survey after the snow melts. G. Moskowitz. February 17th, 2019. Found abandoned camp near Foster Lake. No sign of occupant. All gear still there, including wallet with ID. James Thorne, 27, from Portland. Reported to County Sheriff. G. Moskowitz. March 30th, 2019. Thorne still missing. Sheriff called off search due to lack of resources. Bullshit, they're scared. G. Moskowitz. April 11th, 2019. Found another abandoned camp. Woman this time. Angela Kent, 33, Augusta. Same M.O. All gear present, no signs of struggle. Left a journal. Last entry mentions people watching from the trees. getting too frequent to be coincidence, G. Moskowitz. April 23, 2019. Something happened today. I was checking the East Trail and I don't know how to describe it. A figure standing between the trees, but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin. When I called out, it stepped behind a tree that couldn't have concealed a child, let alone a full-grown person. Gone when I reached the spot. I'm requesting a transfer. G. Moskowitz. May 1st, 2019. Transfer denied. They're sending someone to assist instead. Some tech guy from Boston who's apparently good with mapping software. What the hell good is mapping software going to do? G. Moskowitz. Then Tommy's entry, and nothing after. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the logbook. None of this made sense. Tommy hadn't been sent here. He'd come on a solo camping trip. He'd told me about it, excited to explore the Maine wilderness. He'd never mentioned anything about a ranger job or missing hikers, unless he'd lied to me. But why? A floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around, heart leaping into my throat. A man stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the daylight outside, tall and lean, dressed in the olive-green uniform of a park ranger. "You must be Sarah," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "I've been expecting you." My mouth went dry. "Who are you?" "Gary Moskowitz." He stepped into the cabin, and I could see him better now. A man in his 50s, gray-haired and weathered with tired eyes that had seen too much. "I was hoping you wouldn't come. When Simmons radioed that Tommy Rodriguez's sister was on the trail, well, I knew it was only a matter of time before you found this place. This doesn't make any sense." I clutched the logbook to my chest like a shield. Tommy wasn't a ranger. He was on vacation when he disappeared. Moskowitz's expression softened with what looked like pity. "Is that what they told you? Your brother was working with us. Special assignment. His software was mapping disappearances in the region, looking for patterns. Turned out there was one, all centered around what the locals call the Hollows." "The sign at the trailhead," I whispered. "The Hollows Watch." He nodded. "Old warning. The tribes that lived here before European settlement knew to avoid this area, especially the caves. Said the place was thin, that things could slip through from somewhere else." "That's ridiculous. You're telling me Tommy was involved in some, what, paranormal investigation?" I shook my head. "I don't believe you. Believe what you want." Moskowitz moved further into the cabin, glancing nervously out the windows as if checking for something. "But you need to leave. Now. Before dark. The Hollows are waking up again." "What does that mean? What happened to my brother?" "I don't know." His voice cracked with what sounded like genuine anguish. "I was supposed to meet him here that day. Got held up with a lost kid near the visitor center. By the time I arrived, the place was empty, just like the others, except for his phone. The phone with the terrified voicemail to me. I felt sick. The authorities searched. They searched the wrong places." Moskowitz cut me off. "They wouldn't listen about the caves. Said there was no evidence Tommy ever went near them. But I know that's where he went. That's where they all go. They. The missing ones." Moskowitz turned to face me fully, and I was struck by the hollow fear in his eyes. "And the ones that take them." A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. "You're not making sense. If people are disappearing, why isn't this place crawling with FBI? Why is this cabin abandoned?" "Because officially, this station doesn't exist anymore. After your brother vanished, they closed it down. Said the area was too remote to justify the resources." "Bull. They're afraid of what's happening here, so they pretend it isn't happening at all." He glanced out the window again. "We need to move. It's already afternoon. We don't want to be anywhere near here at sunset." Part of me wanted to run. From this derelict cabin. From Moskowitz's crazy talk. From the entire wilderness. But a stronger part needed answers. Tommy had been here. He'd left me a message in this logbook. Whatever happened to him, the truth was here. Not back in civilization with its neat explanations about hiking accidents and exposure. "The caves," I said. "Where are they?" Moskowitz's face drained of color. "You can't be serious." "My brother went there. I need to see them." "Your brother disappeared there." He stepped closer, his voice urgent. "Listen to me, Sarah. Whatever's in those caves, it's not natural. Not right. People go in, they don't come out. Or worse, something wearing their skin comes out instead." "That's insane." "Is it?" He pointed at my backpack. "You were camping by Foster Lake last night, weren't you? Did anything strange happen? Anything left for you?" The stick figure in my ashes. My blood ran cold. "How did you know that?" "Because it's how they mark you. They're curious before they take you." His eyes bored into mine. "You've been chosen, just like Tommy was." My rational mind rebelled against his words, but deeper instincts, the ones that had evolved to keep our species alive in the darkness before fire, recognized truth when they heard it. The whispers, the shadow by the tree, the feeling of being watched. "Take me to the caves," I insisted, my voice steadier than I felt. "If there's any chance Tommy is still there." We both knew what I meant. Still alive was too much to hope for after 5 years. But still there, a body, remains, some closure, that was possible. Moskowitz stared at me for a long moment, then sighed heavily. "There's no talking you out of this, is there?" I shook my head. "Fine, but we go prepared, and we do not stay after sundown. Understood?" We left the cabin a few minutes later, after Moskowitz had retrieved what he called precautions from a hidden cache beneath the floorboards, an old revolver, which he tucked into his belt, and a cloth pouch that jingled with what sounded like metal objects. "Iron nails," he explained when he caught me looking. "Old superstition, but the locals swear by them. Iron repels, whatever they are." The trail to the caves branched off from the main path about a half-mile from the cabin, a barely visible track that Moskowitz said was kept off official maps. Had Tommy followed this same route 5 years ago? Had he walked these same steps, filled with the same mix of dread and determination that now drove me forward? As we hiked, the forest around us grew denser, darker. The canopy thickened until only occasional shafts of sunlight penetrated to the forest floor. The undergrowth thinned, then disappeared altogether, as if even plants refused to grow here. The silence was oppressive. No birds sang, no insects buzzed. Just the crunch of our boots on the leaf litter and our increasingly labored breathing as the trail climbed upward. "The locals call this part the throat," Moskowitz said quietly, his voice seeming unnaturally loud in the stillness. "They say it swallows people." "Charming," I muttered, trying to mask my growing unease with sarcasm. After about 30 minutes, the trail ended abruptly at the base of a steep limestone cliff that seemed out of place among the surrounding forest. A dark opening yawned in the rock face, about 7 feet high and twice as wide. The Blackwater Caves. Moskowitz unshouldered his pack and retrieved 2 powerful flashlights, handing one to me. "Stay close. The main chamber is just inside, but there are tunnels branching off in all directions. Easy to get lost." The entrance felt like a physical presence, a weight pressing against my skin as we approached. Cold air flowed out of the darkness, carrying a musty scent of damp stone and something else, something organic that I couldn't quite place. Moskowitz hesitated at the threshold, removing the pouch of iron nails from his pocket. He sprinkled a few across the cave entrance, then made what looked like a Hail Mary gesture before stepping inside. I followed, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The main chamber was larger than I'd expected, the ceiling rising at least 20 feet above us. Our lights reflected off moisture on the walls, making the stone glisten like wet skin. Natural columns of limestone rose from floor to ceiling in places, formed over millennia by the patient drip of mineral-laden water. Tommy's research led him to believe the disappearances were concentrated around this cave system, Moskowitz explained as we moved deeper into the chamber. His software mapped a pattern, like ripples in a pond, all emanating from this point. What was he looking for exactly? Answers, same as you. Moskowitz's light played across the far wall, illuminating several dark openings. Those tunnels lead deeper into the system. Some connect back to each other, others go for miles. A few have never been fully explored. I swept my light around the chamber, looking for… what? A sign? Some indication that Tommy had been here? I wasn't sure what I expected to find after 5 years. Then my beam caught something, a flash of color against the gray stone. I moved closer. Scratched into the wall, about shoulder height, was a crude symbol, a circle with a diagonal line through it. Beneath it, initials and a date. TR 5/7/19, Tommy Rodriguez, the day he disappeared. He was here, I whispered, my fingers tracing the scratches in the rock. Tommy had stood in this exact spot, leaving his mark like ancient humans had done in caves throughout history. A sign saying, I was here, I existed. Moskowitz joined me, his light adding to mine on the wall. I never saw this before, but I haven't been back here since… He trailed off. Since Tommy disappeared, I finished for him. Why not? If you suspected this was where it happened… Because I'm afraid, he admitted simply. Whatever's in here, it's not right, Sarah. Can't you feel it? I could. An oppressive awareness had been building since we entered the cave, a certainty that we were not alone. The air felt heavy with watching presence, as if the darkness itself had eyes. Beyond Tommy's mark, my light revealed another tunnel entrance, smaller than the others, requiring you to stoop to enter it. And there, on the ground just before it, something caught my eye. A scrap of faded red fabric, half buried in the fine silt of the cave floor. I knelt down, brushing away the dirt. It was torn from a larger piece, the edges frayed and discolored, but enough remained of a distinctive pattern. A small embroidered compass rose that I recognized it immediately. This is from Tommy's bandana, I said, my voice tight with emotion. He always wore it hiking, said it was his good luck charm. Some luck? Moskowitz's light joined mine on the scrap of fabric, then moved to the low tunnel entrance. He went in there. The certainty in his voice matched my own instinct. This was the way. Whether it led to answers or only deeper questions, I had to follow. Wait, Moskowitz said as I started toward the tunnel. He removed something else from his pocket, a small digital device about the size of a cell phone. Tommy's prototype. He called it an anomaly detector. Measures electromagnetic fields, temperature fluctuations, a bunch of other things I don't understand. He thought whatever was happening here would register on instruments. He switched it on, and the device came to life with a soft blue glow. Numbers and graphs appeared on its screen, meaning nothing to me but causing Moskowitz's brow to furrow. That's not right, he muttered. These readings, they're off the scale. Before I could ask what that meant, a sound reached us from deep within the small tunnel, a whisper just like what I'd heard in the forest, but clearer now. Words, almost recognizable, spoken in a voice that raised the hairs on my arms, because it sounded like Tommy. Sarah. The whisper came again, my name floating out of the darkness. Found it. Found the way through. Tommy? I called, my voice breaking. Tommy, is that you? Moskowitz grabbed my arm as I moved toward the tunnel. That is not your brother, he hissed. Whatever's down there, it's using his voice, like bait in a trap. I shook off his hand. You don't know that. 5 years, Sarah. No one survives in caves for 5 years. But I wasn't thinking rationally anymore. The voice had sounded so much like him, like Tommy as I remembered him, excited about a discovery, calling me to share it like he had countless times growing up. I ducked into the tunnel before Moskowitz could stop me, bent almost double to clear the low ceiling. The passage was narrow but navigable, the floor sloping gently downward. My flashlight beam bounced off walls that seemed to absorb rather than reflect the light, making it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. Behind me, I heard Moskowitz curse, then follow. The sound of his breathing and footsteps was oddly comforting in the close darkness. The tunnel widened after about 50 feet, allowing us to stand upright again. The air grew colder, heavy with moisture that beaded on my skin. My flashlight revealed that we were in another chamber, smaller than the first but with a high domed ceiling lost in darkness above the reach of our lights. "Tommy?" I called again, my voice echoing strangely, as if the acoustics of the chamber were somehow wrong. No answer. But as the echoes faded, I became aware of a new sound, a subtle vibration more felt than heard, like the deepest bass note of a massive organ, just below the threshold of hearing but resonating in my chest. "Do you feel that?" I whispered to Moskowitz. He nodded, his face ashen in the harsh light of our flashlights. "The detector's going crazy," he said, holding up the device which was now emitting a soft, rapid beeping. I swept my light across the chamber, and that's when I saw them, the markings on the wall. Not natural formations or random graffiti, but deliberate symbols carved into the rock face, row after row of them covering an entire section of wall from floor to ceiling. They resembled no alphabet I'd ever seen, curves and angles that hurt the eye to follow, as if they existed in more dimensions than they should. "Tommy was studying indigenous languages," I said, moving closer to the wall. "He might have recognized these." "These aren't from any human language," Moskowitz replied, his voice tight. "And they're fresh." He was right. The cuts in the stone were clean, unweathered by time. Some even glistened wetly as if recently carved. The vibration in the air intensified, becoming an almost audible hum that made my teeth ache. And with it came the whispers again, no longer just Tommy's voice but a chorus of them, overlapping, speaking words I couldn't quite catch but somehow understood on a level deeper than language. "Come through. Join us. The way is open." I stumbled back from the wall, suddenly lightheaded. The symbols seemed to shift and writhe under my gaze, rearranging themselves when I wasn't looking directly at them. "We need to leave," Moskowitz said, his voice urgent. "Now. Before—" He never finished the sentence. The light from his flashlight wavered, then went out completely. Mine followed a second later, plunging us into absolute darkness. For a moment, there was nothing. No light, no sound but our panicked breathing. Then, slowly, the chamber began to illuminate with a pale, greenish glow that seemed to emanate from the symbols on the wall. They pulsed with sickly light, throwing our shadows long and distorted across the cave floor. And we were no longer alone. They stood between us and the tunnel exit. 3 figures, human in general shape, but wrong in every detail. Too tall, too thin, with limbs that bent at impossible angles. Their skin was the color and texture of cave fungus, luminous and slick. Where faces should have been were only smooth expanses of flesh, featureless except for vertical slits that might have been mouths. Yet, somehow, I recognized one of them. Something in the posture, the slight tilt of the head, mannerisms so familiar they cut through the alienness of the form. "Tommy?" I whispered, horror and recognition warring within me. The central figure's head turned toward me with a motion too fluid to be natural. The slit mouth opened and Tommy's voice emerged, but wrong, as if heard through water. "Sarah, you came, just like I knew you would." Beside me, Moskowitz raised his revolver with a shaking hand. "That's not your brother," he said again. "Not anymore." "Don't," I said, though whether to Moskowitz or the thing wearing Tommy's mannerisms, I wasn't sure. The Tommy thing took a step forward, its movement like flowing water. "I found what I was looking for, Sarah. The way through, the hollows between. You can join us now." "Don't listen," Moskowitz hissed, his revolver still trained on the Tommy thing. "They mimic. Use memories. It's how they lure people in." The other two figures began to move as well, gliding forward with that same uncanny fluidity. They had no eyes that I could see, yet I felt their attention like a physical weight. "What are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What happened to my brother?" The Tommy thing tilted its head at an impossible angle. "I evolved, Sarah. Became more. They showed me how to slip through, between worlds, between skins." It raised a too long arm, fingers elongated and glistening. "You can too." "My brother is dead," I said, the truth of it finally settling into my bones. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't Tommy. Maybe it had his memories. Maybe it had consumed him somehow. But the brother I knew was gone. "Not dead," it corrected, its voice rippling with echoes. "Transformed. The caves are the threshold. The markings are the key. They've been waiting for someone who could understand them. Tommy did. You will too." Moskowitz's grip on the revolver tightened. "We're leaving. Now." The Tommy thing made a sound like water rushing over stones. Laughter, I realized with a chill. "Ranger Gary. Always so afraid. We offered you the same gift. So many times. Why do you resist?" "Because I've seen what your gift really means," Moskowitz snapped. "The others you took. What came back wearing their skins. Walking around town for days, watching, selecting the next ones." My blood ran cold. "What is he talking about?" "Not all who enter stay," the Tommy thing explained, still using my brother's speech patterns, his inflections. "Some return. Changed. Better. Scouts for what comes next." "Which is what?" I demanded, anger momentarily overriding fear. The three creatures went still, unnaturally so, as if they'd suddenly been carved from stone. Then, as one, their slit mouths opened wider than should have been possible, revealing rows of crystalline structures where teeth should have been. "The thinning," they said in unison, the word reverberating through the chamber. "When all barriers fall, when they can all come through." The green light from the symbols pulsed brighter, casting writhing shadows across the cave floor. The vibration in the air intensified, making my ears pop painfully. "We need to run," Moskowitz urged. "They're calling others." As if on cue, a new sound reached us. A skittering, scratching noise from the tunnel behind us, the one we hadn't come through. Something was coming. The Tommy thing seemed to sense my hesitation. "Stay, Sarah. I missed you. 5 years alone, waiting for the right moment. For you to be ready." For an instant, just an instant, I wavered. Despite everything, some part of me still hoped that somehow, somewhere inside that grotesque form, something of my brother remained. The Tommy who taught me to fish, who helped me with math homework, who called me the night he disappeared. The memory of that terror-filled voicemail snapped me back to reality. Tommy had been afraid. Whatever happened to him in these caves, it wasn't a willing transformation. It was something done to him. I stepped back, away from the creatures. "You're not my brother." The Tommy thing's posture changed, the almost human mannerisms dropping away, replaced by something utterly alien. "Then you'll become like him another way." It lunged forward with impossible speed. Moskowitz fired. The gunshot was deafening in the confines of the cave, the flash momentarily blinding. The Tommy thing jerked backward, a hole appearing in its chest cavity, but instead of blood, a luminous green fluid oozed from the wound. "Run!" Moskowitz shouted, firing again as the other two creatures advanced. We ran, stumbling through the darkness toward the tunnel we'd entered through. Behind us, the skittering sound grew louder, accompanied now by a high-pitched keening that made my teeth vibrate. The tunnel mouth loomed ahead, a slightly less dark patch in the darkness. I ducked into it, Moskowitz right behind me. The confined space was terrifying now, knowing what pursued us, but it was our only way out. We half ran, half crawled through the tunnel, the sounds of pursuit growing closer. My knees and palms were scraped raw from the rough stone, but adrenaline numbed the pain. all that mattered was escape. "The iron nails," Moskowitz gasped as we neared the end of the tunnel. "At the entrance. Might slow them down." We burst into the main chamber, instantly orienting toward the cave entrance and the fading daylight beyond. Behind us, the keening rose to a fever pitch, echoing off the walls. I risked a glance back. They were coming through the tunnel. Not just the three we'd seen, but more. A writhing mass of pale, elongated limbs and smooth, featureless faces. Too many to count. Too many to fight. Moskowitz stumbled, his ankle turning on a loose stone. He went down hard, the revolver clattering across the cave floor. I stopped, reaching back to help him up. "Go," he shouted, pushing me away. "Get out. Warn people. I'm not leaving you. You have to." His eyes were wild with fear and determination. "Someone has to know the truth." The first of the creatures emerged from the tunnel, its body contorting in ways that defied anatomy to squeeze through the narrow opening. The Tommy thing was among them, the wound in its chest already closing, the green fluid hardening like amber. Moskowitz pulled something from his pocket, a small metal lighter. "I'll buy you time." I didn't understand until I saw the small canister in his other hand, the emergency flare from his ranger kit. "Moskowitz, no. Run, Sarah. Don't stop until you're out of the hollows." I ran. The cave entrance was just ahead, the last rays of sunlight streaming through. Behind me came a fierce hiss, followed by the whoosh of the flare igniting. Moskowitz's scream was cut terribly short. I burst out of the cave into the dimming forest, legs pumping, lungs burning. The rational part of my mind knew I should pace myself for the long trek back, but rationality had no place here. Only flight mattered. Light. A sound like rushing water rose from the cave behind me, followed by an unearthly shrieking. I didn't look back. Couldn't. The forest was darker now, sunset approaching rapidly. I followed the faint trail as best I could, grateful for Moskowitz's iron nails scattered across the cave entrance. Whether they'd actually slowed the creatures down or not, I couldn't tell, but I clung to the hope that they had. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing onto the forest floor, gasping for breath. Only then did I realize I'd made it back to the ranger cabin clearing. The dilapidated structure stood in the gathering gloom, a poor shelter, but better than nothing. I dragged myself inside, closing the door and wedging a broken chair beneath the handle for what little security it might provide. Then I sank to the floor, trembling from exhaustion and delayed shock. Tommy was gone. Had been gone for 5 years. Whatever spoke with his voice, moved with his mannerisms, it wasn't him. It was something else, something that had taken pieces of him and incorporated them into itself. And Moskowitz. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the memory of his final scream. He'd died to give me a chance to escape, to warn others about what lurked in the Blackwater caves. The thinning, they'd called it, when barriers fall, when they can all come through. I opened my eyes, suddenly alert to a new sensation. Silence. The forest outside the cabin window had gone completely quiet. No birds, no insects, nothing but the soft rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. They were coming. I scrambled to my feet, looking frantically around the cabin for anything that might serve as a weapon. My bear spray was still in my pack, but against creatures that shrugged off bullets, what good would it do? My eyes fell on the logbook, still lying where I'd dropped it earlier. Tommy's final message to me. "Tell Sarah I'm sorry." Sorry for what? For being taken? For becoming whatever he'd become? Or for something else? Something he'd discovered in his research, perhaps. Something about the caves, about the creatures. I snatched up the logbook, flipping rapidly through the pages, searching for any clue, any insight Tommy might have left behind. There had to be something, some weakness, some way to fight back. The sound of footsteps outside froze me in place, the soft, too fluid footfalls of something not quite human. They circled the cabin slowly, deliberately, like a predator assessing its prey. A shadow passed by the window, elongated and wrong. Another joined it. then another. They were surrounding the cabin. The floorboards behind me creaked. I spun around, a scream lodged in my throat. A form stood in the shadowed corner of the cabin, tall, thin, unnaturally still. It hadn't come through the door. It was simply there, as if it had stepped through the very walls. "Sarah," it whispered in Tommy's voice. "No more running, no more fear." It moved into a shaft of fading sunlight from the window, and I saw that it was indeed the Tommy thing, its chest now fully healed, leaving only a crystalline scar where Moskowitz's bullet had struck. "What do you want?" I demanded, backing away until I hit the wall, to complete what Tommy started. It glided forward. He came looking for the truth about the disappearances, found something far greater, a door between worlds, a transformation waiting to happen. "You killed him." "Killed?" It tilted its head, the gesture sickeningly familiar. "No. Elevated, as will elevate you, as will elevate them all, when the thinning comes." More shadows appeared at the windows, faceless silhouettes watching with sightless gazes. The walls of the cabin suddenly felt paper-thin, as if the barrier between inside and outside was becoming permeable. "The world is changing, Sarah," the Tommy thing continued, now just a few feet away. "The boundaries weakening, the hollows spreading. Soon there will be no separation, no distinction. All will flow together." Its arm extended, impossibly long, fingers elongating like pale roots reaching toward me. I pressed myself against the wall, nowhere left to retreat. "Tommy fought," it said, almost sadly. "In the beginning, before he understood, before he saw the beauty of it, the inevitability." My hand brushed against something on the wall behind me, a small metal box. A fuse box, I realized. The cabin must have had electricity once. "You don't have to fight," the Tommy thing urged, its fingers now inches from my face. "It's painless. A moment of cold, then warmth, then understanding." My fingers found the latch on the fuse box, flipped it open. Inside was a tangle of old wires, long dead, and something else. A small cloth pouch, identical to the one Moskowitz had carried. Iron nails. Without thinking, I grabbed the pouch and hurled it at the Tommy thing's face. It recoiled with a sound like steam escaping a pressure valve, its featureless face contorting in what might have been pain. I didn't wait to see more. I lunged for the door, tearing away the chair I'd wedged against it, and burst outside. The clearing was filled with them now. Dozens of the pale, elongated figures all turned toward me with their eyeless faces. They made no sound, but I felt their hunger like a physical force. I ran again, blindly this time. No thought for direction or destination. Simply away. Away from the cabin, away from the creatures, away from the thing that had once been my brother. The forest was nearly dark now, the last light fading from the sky. I stumbled through underbrush, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. Behind me came that terrible flowing movement, the sound of things that moved wrong pursuing through the gathering night. I don't know how long I ran, or in what direction. Time seemed to stretch and compress strangely, minutes feeling like hours, yet the distance I covered seeming impossibly short. The forest itself felt wrong, altered somehow, as if the very geography of the place was becoming fluid, unstable. When my foot came down on emptiness where solid ground should have been, I had only an instant to register surprise before I was falling. The ravine had appeared suddenly, or perhaps had always been there, and I'd simply been too panicked to see it. Either way, the result was the same: a sickening drop through darkness, the momentary sensation of flying, then impact. Pain exploded through my body as I hit the slope, tumbling down in a shower of loose stones and earth. I rolled, bounced, slid, unable to stop my descent until I finally came to rest at the bottom. The breath knocked from my lungs. For long moments I could only lie there, struggling to breathe, certain that something vital was broken inside me. The pain was everywhere, sharp and insistent. But gradually, as my senses returned, I realized I could move. Bruised, scraped, possibly spraining something, but not broken, not dead. Above me, at the top of the ravine, pale shapes gathered. Their elongated limbs reached down as if testing the air, but they did not descend. Something was holding them back. Water, I realized. I was lying half in, half out of a fast-moving stream at the bottom of the ravine. The icy water soaked through my clothes, numbing the pain but sending a different kind of agony through my chilled limbs. The creatures recoiled from the water's edge, their movements agitated. I remembered what Moskowitz had said about the caves, that the tribes who lived here before European settlement called the place thin, a place where things could slip through from somewhere else. Maybe this stream, this ordinary rushing water, was a boundary they couldn't cross. Not yet, anyway. Not until the thinning was complete. I dragged myself fully into the stream, gasping at the cold but welcoming its protection. The current was strong, threatening to carry me downstream. Instead of fighting it, I let it take me, using what strength I had left to keep my head above water. The creatures followed along the bank, their pale forms weaving through the trees, keeping pace. They made no sound, but I could feel their hunger, their frustration at being denied. The stream widened, the current growing stronger. I was swept around a bend, momentarily losing sight of my pursuers, then into a broader channel where the water ran deeper and more swiftly. Ahead, the sound of the current changed, deepening to a roar. Rapids or a waterfall. Either way, I had no strength left to fight the pull. I was committed now, for better or worse. As the stream carried me forward, I had a sudden, vivid memory of Tommy teaching me to swim in the lake near our grandparents' house one summer. "Don't fight the water, Sarah," he'd said. "Respect it. Work with it. It's stronger than you'll ever be." I surrendered to the current just as the stream dropped away beneath me. For a dizzying moment, I was suspended in air, the roar of falling water filling my ears. Then I plunged downward into the pool below. The impact drove the air from my lungs again. I tumbled through the churning water, disoriented, unable to tell up from down. My chest burned with the need for oxygen. Just as spots began to dance before my eyes, my feet touched something solid, the bottom of the pool. I pushed off with my last reserves of strength, shooting upward. I broke the surface with a desperate gasp, gulping air into starved lungs. The pool I'd fallen into was large, fed by the waterfall I'd just come over. And standing at its edge, pointing a flashlight at me, was a figure in the uniform of a park ranger. "Holy shit," a woman's voice exclaimed. "Are you all right? How did you get here?" I floundered toward her, too exhausted to speak, simply reaching for the human connection after the horrors I'd experienced. She waded in, grabbed my arm and helped pull me to shore, where I collapsed on the rocky bank, shivering uncontrollably. "My name is Ranger Diaz," she said, crouching beside me and wrapping an emergency blanket around my shoulders. "Can you tell me who you are? What happened?" Sarah Rodriguez," I managed through chattering teeth. "I hiked in yesterday. Got lost." Diaz's expression shifted from concern to recognition. "Rodriguez? Wait, are you related to that missing hiker from a few years back?" I nodded, too exhausted to explain further. She keyed her radio. "Base, this is Diaz. I found a hiker at Broken Falls. Female. Suffering exposure, needs medical evacuation." "Over." The radio crackled with a response I couldn't make out. Diaz helped me to my feet, supporting most of my weight. "Let's get you somewhere warm," she said. "My vehicle's not far. Can you walk a little?" I managed to nod, leaning heavily on her as we made our way along a well-maintained trail. My mind was hazy with cold and exhaustion, but one thought remained crystal clear. I needed to warn them. About the caves, about what lived there, about what was coming. "The caves," I stammered. "Blackwater Sea caves. Dangerous." "Don't worry about that now," Diaz soothed. We need to get you treated for exposure first." "No," I clutched at her arm. "Listen, people disappearing. Tommy, Moskowitz, the thinning is coming." Diaz paused, her expression changing. "Moskowitz? Gary Moskowitz? What about him?" "Dead," I whispered. "The things in the sea caves, they killed him. Took Tommy. Others too." Her face hardened. "Gary Moskowitz has been dead for 5 years. Ma'am, heart attack. Found in his cabin." The world seemed to tilt sideways. "No, that's not. I just saw him. Today. He took me to the sea caves." Diaz was looking at me differently now, concern mixed with something else. Suspicion? Pity? "Ma'am, Gary Moskowitz died in 2019, same week your brother went missing. There was an investigation." But my voice trailed off as a terrible possibility took root. If Moskowitz had been dead all along, then who or what had guided me to the caves? What had spoken to me in his voice, worn his face? "A scout," the Tommy thing had said. Some return. Changed. Better. Scouts for what comes next. Diaz was watching me closely, her hand now resting on the taser at her belt. "Ma'am, you've been through a trauma. You're confused. Let's get you to medical help, and then you can talk to the proper authorities." I let her lead me forward, my mind racing despite my exhaustion. They wouldn't believe me. Of course they wouldn't. A traumatized woman babbling about creatures in caves, about a dead ranger guiding her, about her missing brother transformed into something inhuman. They'd attribute it to exposure, to grief, to mental illness. But I knew what I'd seen, what I'd experienced. The threat brewing in the hollows was real, and it was spreading. The thinning the creatures spoke of wasn't just coming. It had already begun. How many of them were already out here, wearing familiar faces, moving among unsuspecting people? Scouting. Preparing. As Diaz helped me into her ranger vehicle, I caught sight of our reflection in the window glass. My face, pale and drawn with exhaustion, and beside me, Diaz's profile. Familiar features, normal movements. Human. But for how long? I turned to look at her directly, studying her face, searching for any sign, any hint of wrongness. She caught my gaze and gave me a reassuring smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You're safe now," she said, starting the engine. "We'll take good care of you." As we drove away from the falls, away from the stream that had saved me, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with my wet clothes or the night air. Ahead lay civilization, people, help, perhaps even belief if I could find the right person to listen. Behind us, in the darkness of the forest, in the depth of the caves, in the heart of the hollows, they waited, watched, prepared. And somewhere among them, wearing my brother's memories like a borrowed skin, the thing that had once been Tommy Rodriguez was watching too. The thinning was coming, and I was the only one who knew. My name is Sarah Rodriguez, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the northern reaches of Maine's Allagash wilderness, where the trees grow so dense they seem to swallow the sky. And it isn't over. Not by a long shot.